Christmas Star Sapphire, a novella, Part 6 of the Jewel series. A Jewel series, second-generation story. Written by Hallee Bridgeman. Read by Jean Rowley. Chapter 1. When Madeline Viscolli arrived a few minutes late at the small auditorium on the east side of the university's campus, she expected to see a few dozen people already there, but found only one lone man sitting on the floor with his back against the base of the raised stage. Frowning, she glanced at her watch. Surely on the campus of one of the largest universities in Alabama, the Crew program had more than one person involved. Once called Campus Crusade for Christ, Crew served on college campuses all over the world. Crew provided students with worship and fellowship opportunities in a body of believers, a family away from family. While an undergraduate at the University of Florida, she'd spent hours and hours with her Crew family and grew into a deeper relationship with God than she'd ever even thought possible. She'd gone on 4 mission trips spanning a total of 8 different countries, volunteered in summer programs, and had developed friendships she knew she would treasure for the rest of her life. Now, pursuing a master's degree in business, she found herself on the coast of Alabama hoping to integrate into a new Crew group. Never shy, Madeline walked into the nearly empty building and marched straight down the aisle. The man looked up from his book and smiled at her. He had light red hair and a goatee that looked nearly blonde. As she drew closer, she recognized the logo on his T-shirt from her favorite seafood restaurant in Key West. "Hello," he greeted, setting his book aside and standing. Even though Madeline stood just 2 inches shy of 6 feet, she had to look up at him. He smiled warmly and looked directly into her rich blue eyes as he held out his hand. "Joseph Westcott, Pastor Joe, though most people just go with Joe. Madeline Viscolli." She shook his hand. Even though he kept his grip purposefully light, she felt the hard calluses on his palms. Her father, an avid rower, had similar calluses. So he was a pastor. Why was no one else here then? "Am I in the right place for the Crew meeting?" "You sure are," he answered, his green eyes shining with amusement. "And you'll be right on time in about 58 minutes. "Doesn't the meeting start at 6? Madeline frowned, checking her watch. "Yes, it does." He raised an eyebrow. "Still on East Coast time?" Why would he be asking? Feeling her face flood with heat, she realized, "Of course, we're in Central Time." With a friendly laugh, he gestured toward a cooler that sat on the floor near the stage. "Takes a little while to lose that hour. Water?" "That would be lovely, thank you." Accepting the ice-cold bottle from him, she slipped her bag off of her shoulder and sat in one of the comfortable auditorium seats. "I didn't get in until just now. Came straight from the airport. I actually scheduled my arrival to coordinate with the meeting." "Where are you coming from, Miss Viscolli?" While he casually dropped the verb much like a native, his accent didn't sound deep south to her ear. It made his manner of speaking interesting. His warm smile made it even more interesting. "I graduated last spring from the University of Florida." She took a long pull from the bottle, not realizing how thirsty she felt until the icy water hit her dry throat. "I'm going to be getting my master's here." "Gators? Let me think." He hopped up onto the stage facing her. He wore leather deck shoes with no socks, and despite the red hair, had a rather dark tan. "Chris Wilson still the Crew director there?" Picturing the dark brown face and laughing light brown eyes of Pastor Chris, Madeline smiled. "He is. His wife just had their second baby. He showed me pictures at our annual conference." He gestured at his T-shirt. "I usually spend a good bit of the summer in Florida myself." The calluses on his palm and the tan lines, despite his fair complexion, had her guessing his hobby. "Do you sail?" His eyebrows rose in surprise. "How did you know that?" Madeline shrugged. "Lots of little clues, I guess." Plus, she could see him, in her mind's eye, on the deck of a little catamaran, skimming the turquoise waves off the Florida Keys. Her family had a home down there, and she had spent her childhood living in either Boston or southern Florida. Sailboats were just a part of what she considered normal in life. "Quite observant, Miss Viscolli." He pronounced her name perfectly, long O sound and all. He looked at his watch. "We have some time before the meeting. If anyone else had their times mixed up, they would have been here by now. Honestly, you should probably eat something now if you're still on Eastern Time. You'll be starving in a few hours. Want to grab a coffee and a snack or something?" "Actually, I think I'll skip tonight and go find my apartment." She stood, almost instantly regretting turning down the offer. She suddenly realized she might enjoy getting to know Mr. Westcott better. "I thought I'd have more energy. I just got in from spending the last several weeks in England with my brother and his wife, and I'm a bit jet-lagged." Waving a hand around the room, she added, "Hence the mix-up with the time." She picked up her bag and slipped the strap over her shoulder. "I look forward to the next few years, Pastor Joe Westcott. Crew has been a major focus of my life since my first day at college. I'm praying I'll be able to develop the kind of friendships I had in Florida." He scooted off the stage and held out his hand. Without hesitation, she placed her hand in his again. "It was truly a pleasure to meet you, Madeline Viscolli. I look forward to seeing you again very soon, and I'll be sure to email Chris Wilson and let him know I met you." He held her hand throughout this tiny little monologue, then gave her fingers a gentle squeeze before he released her grasp. Did he hold her hand a heartbeat longer than necessary, or was that just her jet-lagged brain slowing everything down? Madeline had to hit the panic button on her electronic key fob to find her rental car. She felt rather foolish about that. But after traveling for the last 20 or so hours, she honestly couldn't remember what color cars she'd just rented. The remnants of a hurricane hitting the coast of Massachusetts had thrown all of her travel plans off and brought her here 2 days later than originally planned. So when she arrived at the airport so close to the crew meet and greet time, she just rented a car. She would visit the car dealership to pick up her new lease vehicle later in the week. Audibly thanking God for built-in GPS, she input the address of her new apartment and followed the electronic voice's directions to an upscale townhouse neighborhood within walking distance of campus. Her father, Tony, had told her he'd rented her an apartment. Madeline had expected a studio apartment, or at most a 2-bedroom place. The red brick townhome surprised her, though it likely shouldn't have. She pulled into the driveway, not really astonished to see another rental car already there. She dug through her purse and found the key her father's secretary had delivered to her in England, then popped the trunk on the rental car. She pulled her suitcases out of the trunk and secured them together so she wouldn't have to make another trip outside. When she unlocked the door to the townhouse, she smelled fresh paint and new carpet. She also caught a whiff of her mother's perfume about 2 seconds before she saw her. "Madeline," Robin Viscolli greeted, coming forward with her arms extended. "Mama!" Madeline hadn't seen her mother in 3 weeks. She had inherited her mother's height and sapphire blue eyes, but the resemblance nearly ended there. Where Robin had thick blonde hair that fell to her shoulders in soft curls, Madeline had her father's dark hair and Italian complexion. "I'm so happy you're here." She let her mom pull her into her arms and hugged her back tightly. When they broke the embrace, Robin smiled and ran a hand over Madeline's hair. "I'm thrilled to be able to help you settle in. I missed you while you were visiting your brother. I'll show you around, and you can tell me how he and Faith are doing these days." They walked through the entryway and into a room with gleaming wood floors. A large wooden desk sat on a rectangular oriental rug. The desk faced a big bay window that looked out onto a small porch and a manicured lawn. An ornate wrought iron table and chairs and a covered stainless steel grill looked perfectly at home on the porch. Several bookcases lined the 2 available walls. About half the shelves held books. Madeline saw boxes stacked in the corner and suspected they contained yet more books. "Your father sent the books he thought you'd need on top of the ones you said you wanted," Robin said. "I was just unpacking when I heard you pull in." "I love this desk," Madeline said, leaving the suitcases by the stairs and walking into the room. She ran her fingers over the gleaming wood. "It is so beautiful." "I had it custom designed for you," Tony Viscolli confessed, coming down the stairs. "Hello, Philia." "Papa!" Madeline rushed into his familiar arms, breathing in the scent of his aftershave. "Mama didn't tell me you were here, too." "I assumed it was assumed," Robin teased with a grin. "We got in yesterday. How are you, Philia? You look tired," he stated, studying her face. "I had a pretty long layover in Amsterdam." Tony scolded. "Should have taken the Viscolli jet." Madeline half smiled. "I don't mind flying commercial." Robin interjected. "How are your brother and Faith doing?" Madeline smiled. "England is beautiful in the summer. It rains like Florida, hard and fast and completely dry a few minutes later. Their little house is so nice, and I really, really like Faith. I like her more the more time we spend together. She's the coolest British chick in the world, and TJ is incredibly happy, happier than I've ever seen him. I can't wait to visit again." Robin interjected. "We've already made them promise to join us in the Keys this Christmas." "Faith will probably want to fly." Madeline had declined the opportunity to fly with Faith in her recently repaired North American NA-16 during her brief visit, though she had gladly watched from the ground while her sister-in-law performed dangerous-looking aerodynamic stunts in a recently acquired submarine Spitfire Mk9. Even watching from the ground had made Madeline's stomach feel a little bit queasy. Tony slipped his arm over his wife's shoulder. Madeline always enjoyed watching her parents when they were together. Her father completely doted on her mother, who in turn absolutely adored her father. Madeline often prayed that she would find a love like that one day. "The desk," he said, gesturing with his free hand, "will go with you wherever you decide to work." As a corporate mogul with businesses that spanned the globe, Tony could offer Madeline her pick of locations in which to permanently settle and hand over control of businesses he expected her to start to manage. She had her choice of everything from a Christian movie studio to five-star hotels and just about anything in between. Her interest in her father's companies and business dealings had engaged her since before high school. Her older and only brother, TJ, had never desired to take the reins of the Viscolli empire. Madeline, however, had longed to sit behind the big desk ever since hosting tea parties in her father's office at age 4. "If only I could settle on what I want to do," she said a bit wistfully. "I still contend that my time might be better served to just start working rather than continue my education right now." "Yet you felt God's call to come to Mobile despite so many good schools closer to Boston. It's always better to listen to his voice rather than your own," Tony countered. He stepped away from his wife and took his only daughter's hand. For whatever reason, the calluses on his palms made her think of Joe Westcott, the young Cru pastor she had just met. When God has you fully prepared, then we'll all know where you should go and what you should do. He crossed the room and retrieved her suitcases before walking back to the staircase. "In the meantime, let's get you settled. The circles under your eyes are about to pull you over, Giovanni Filia." She followed them up the stairs and into the large living area. Her mother walked into the living room while her father continued up the stairs with her luggage. On the second floor, a sectional couch faced a fireplace where a large flat-screen television hung above the mantel. A balcony looked out over the lawn she'd seen from the study. She could see a kitchen through a door and walked in that direction, stepping into an area almost the size of the living room with a large island in the kitchen half and a round table with 4 chairs in the dining half. With half an ear and a head buzzing from exhaustion, she listened to her mother explain the staples and supplies with which she'd stocked the kitchen. "Why don't you go find a bed, Madeline? You look beat. You can explore later." She nodded as she yawned, then left the kitchen. Back in the living room, she went up the stairs and entered a small hallway. Her feet sank into the plush bone-colored carpet. Directly in front of her stood a bathroom, and on either side she saw the open doors of bedrooms. Seeing evidence of which room her parents had taken, she walked into the other one. A double bed sat in the middle of the room, covered with a quilt done in the blue and orange of the University of Florida, handmade for her by her great-aunt Darlene, her Aunt Sarah's adoptive mother. She smiled as she ran her fingers over the warm quilt. Her father emerged from a doorway in the corner of the room. "This is the smaller bedroom, but it has the large walk-in closet and connects to the main bath," he explained. He walked up to her and put his hands on her shoulders, then kissed her forehead. "We're pleased with the unit and the location. I think it will be a good place for you to live and work while you're here." "Thanks, Papa." She pointed at the bed. "I'm just going to rest." "Best thing to do," he agreed. "Try to sleep until tomorrow morning. We'll explore the city then. Who knows? Perhaps we can even go see the battleship Alabama if you feel like it. Send some pictures to your brother to make him jealous." Chapter 2. 1 year later. Joe Westcott enjoyed the Gulf breeze in the early dawn. He had risen before sunrise and left his 49-foot sailboat, which he had christened Star Sapphire, anticipating a great bike ride all the way onto campus. He unlocked his bike and quietly walked it to the end of the dock, past his sleeping neighbors' vessels floating in their steel moorings. As he walked, he accessed the audio Bible on his smartphone, plugged the earbuds into the headphone jack, and secured the phone to his arm with the Velcro athletic band. The deep voice of the narrator reading the second book of Kings filled his ears before he strapped on his brightly colored helmet. When he reached the pavement, he hopped onto his bike and started pedaling, slowly enough to warm up the muscles in his legs without cramping, but rapidly enough to make good time. He left the scent of the sea behind him as he worked his way into thicker and thicker traffic. The temperature rose with the sun and sweat poured down his face. At a stoplight, he straddled his bike and pulled a small towel out of the bag strapped to the center bar, using it to wipe the sweat out of his eyes while he listened to Jehu war with Jorab. An hour later, morning rush hour in full swing, he avoided colliding with a hybrid car by hopping his bike onto the sidewalk. The woman driving it while talking on her cell phone never even noticed him. Without breaking pace, he maneuvered back onto the road and kept going. Most mornings, he made it to the University of Southern Alabama's campus in an hour and 15 minutes. He had come to realize that he needed that daily time spent listening to the Word of God. Interestingly, he could read a passage, then listen to the same passage and hear things he never picked up reading. As he approached campus, he waited until the current chapter came to an end, then turned off the audio. He locked his bike in the bike rack by the student recreation building and went inside to shower. By the time he had showered and dressed, the campus had woken up. The gym rang with the sounds of activity, and his bike now had some companions in the rack. Knowing he had time before his morning staff meeting, he headed to the Student Center building. After locking his bike, he turned and ran into a group of 4 crew students going into the building. Of course, he recognized Madeline Viscolli. After talking with her privately the day of the meet and greet the year before, she always stood out to him in a crowd. No matter how many students he could count in attendance, one glance through the group and he'd spot her. She hadn't participated in the summer program this year. He knew she'd taken classes all summer long. Partway through the summer, it had occurred to him that he kept hopefully looking for her in the crowd, until he consciously forced himself to stop. This morning she wore an olive green shirt belted at the waist with a leather belt and a pair of blue jeans. With large sunglasses covering her face and her long black hair pulled into a loose braid that fell over her shoulder, she looked like a woman about to command an army. When he expected to see her, he could usually brace himself and control his reaction to her presence. The unexpected times, the chance meetings, those actually took his breath away and made him feel nervous, jittery, and uncharacteristically shy. He had seen a lot of beautiful things in his life. He had experienced sunrises and sunsets on the horizons of crystal seas that would envelop every sense like a living symphony of light. He had seen longboats and yachts that had been handcrafted with the finest attention to the smallest detail soar over the water like sea breezes. He had seen real beauty in his lifetime. Even so, he had never seen anything as beautiful as Madeline Viscolli. Maybe other men didn't see her as beautiful. Maybe to them she looked just like any other girl with dark hair and deep blue eyes. Unlike those other men, Joe had to struggle not to let her beauty distract him. Shaking his head at his inner thoughts, he smiled. "Morning, ladies," he greeted, unhooking his helmet. "Early class this morning?" The freshman from Tuscaloosa, Patsy Mitchell, put her hand on the shoulder of a young brunette he did not recognize. "Morning, Joe. This is my dorm mate, Barbara. She's coming to our meeting tonight." She looked at her friend. "Joe's our crew guy." He smiled and held out his hand. Barbara hesitated just half a second before accepting his offered handshake. "Nice to meet you," she said shyly, not meeting his eyes. "And you. Look forward to seeing you tonight." "She's going to love it," sophomore Tamara Walters exclaimed in a sing-song voice. "Where are you coming from, Barbara?" While he spoke, he secured his bike helmet and unstrapped his bag and slipped it over his shoulder. "Birmingham." Madeline slipped her sunglasses off of her face and perched them atop her head. Her deep blue eyes stared at him frankly, and she offered, "Join us for breakfast, Joe?" "Sure, but just coffee." Always looking for an opportunity to speak to new students, he gladly accepted. After glancing at his watch, he said, "I have about 20 minutes. Tamara opened the door to the student center. "Plenty of time." Joe took hold of the door to let the women lead the way, then followed them to the coffee shop. It took several minutes to fill every coffee order, but soon they all sat around a table. He pointed to a nearby poster depicting the head of a jaguar, the school mascot. "Do you know that jaguars are skilled swimmers?" Madeline raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "Despite their felineness?" It would seem. Maybe no one told them cats are supposed to detest water. When Madeline smiled and laughed out loud, it seemed to Joe that the room suddenly grew about 10% brighter. What was this fascination he had with her? He turned his attention to Barbara. "Did you always live in Birmingham, Barbara?" She took a sip of her coffee while nodding. "I wanted to go to Bama, but my boyfriend Zach got a soccer scholarship here." As she looked around the student center, she said very weakly, "So here we are." Tamara reached over and touched her hand. "Hey, you should invite Zach tonight. My boyfriend will be there." Barbara looked around again. "No, he wouldn't like that." Her eyes widened and she stood abruptly. "There's Zach. I'll see y'all later." She rushed away toward a tall blonde kid in a sleeveless t-shirt and bike shorts. Joe watched as he gripped the girl by the back of the neck, then gave her a harsh kiss. Joe felt himself frown and purse his lips as he watched the dynamics from across the room. Madeline pulled him out of his inspection. "So, Mr. Westcott, how was your summer?" "Fantastic. I managed to get about 3 weeks of downtime toward the end of the summer." Looking directly at Madeline, he pushed thoughts of Barbara out of his mind. "It's shaping up to be a great year. Our planning meetings have been exciting." "Any news on the summer mission trip yet?" Patsy asked. Joe grinned. "Well, it's still set for summer, Patsy. Let me focus on the beginning of the new school year before launching back into summer, okay?" "Not fair," Patsy pouted, actually sticking her lip out. It took real strength of will not to roll his eyes. Madeline's eyelids lowered in disapproval as she sipped her coffee. He couldn't help mentally contrasting the display of entitled childishness with Madeline Viscolli's cool maturity. "Well, Solomon never promised fair." Joe glanced at his watch, then stood and grabbed up his bag. "Ladies, thank you for allowing me to crash your party this morning. I'll see you all tonight." Madeline lifted her cup in a salute to him. "I could think of very few men I would have enjoyed sharing a cup of coffee with more, Pastor Joe." His hands fumbled as he picked up the coffee cup, and the flimsy lid popped loose. With an exclaimed, "Whoops!" he barely caught the entire cup before humiliatingly spilling it all over the table. Feeling the tips of his ears heat up with the flush that certainly covered his face, he turned without a word and walked out of the building. He wished the late August air didn't feel so hot and muggy this morning. He'd love to take a cool, deep breath and stop the visceral reaction he felt. Instead, the damp air clung to his skin as soon as he stepped out of the air-conditioned building. What he wanted to do was turn around and go back inside and ask Madeline Viscolli if she wanted to join him for lunch, too. His feet paused. Where did that thought come from? Shaking his head as if to banish the notion, he continued on his way. He already had one demanding female in his life, and her name was Star Sapphire. He didn't need to add a girl with sapphire eyes and the prettiest smile he'd ever seen. As he walked across campus, he stopped and talked to 4 different students he knew. By the time he made it to the rendezvous point, he was about 3 minutes late. As expected, the red Honda sat idling on the side of the road in the shade of a magnolia tree. "Sorry I'm late, dude," Joe apologized while sliding into the passenger seat. "Had an impromptu coffee meeting." His team leader, Max Dominic, put the car in gear. "You always have impromptu meetings. Can't think of a time we've gone anywhere together you haven't known half the people there." Joe chuckled and gestured at his hair. "Well, I tend to stand out. You can't be a ginger of this impressive height and blend into the background." Max, who had skin the color of the darkest of chocolates and whose height rivaled Joe's, simply said, "Tell me about it, brother." They drove to the printing shop and picked up a box of brochures Max's wife had designed the weekend before, then headed to the church that hosted their large weekly meetings. "Most of the team will be here at 9, he said. "But I wanted to see if you can get the sound synced with this video presentation I made. I'm about 1/10 of a second off and I can't fix it." Joe patted his bag. "No problem, man. I brought my laptop." He opened the cardboard box a crack and pulled out one of the trifold brochures. "These look fantastic." "I agree. Hopefully we can get them handed out and get some more students interested in the meeting. That worship team we've put together will bring them. I'm looking forward to tonight." They pulled into the church parking lot and the men got out of the car. Joe left the box of brochures in the seat. "You checked the weather report lately?" Joe thought of the big swirling storm sitting in the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico, Hurricane Leroy. "I have. If you need to do something, you have to let us know." "I think we're good for now. No one really knows the track yet. It's just a giant spinning top out there." He tapped the roof of the car. "Ready? Let me see what we can do with your video." Madeline caught the end of the weather report just as she turned on her television. She frowned. It looked like Leroy couldn't decide where to go. She didn't fear the hurricane. It wouldn't be too hard to pack her Land Rover and head in another direction. Last year, she'd had to evacuate just once. She made her way to Atlanta and holed up in a penthouse suite in the downtown Viscolli Hotel while she worked on midterms. But she wished she knew just what danger actually lay ahead instead of this constant focus on the weather reports. Turning the television back off, she grabbed her purse and headed downstairs. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the books piled on her desk. I'll be back to contend with you after worship," she promised the inanimate objects. She exited her house through the garage door, locking everything behind her. The warm evening air made her glad she'd chosen a skirt over jeans, and the mile walk told her that her choice of flat sandals beat out the heels she'd contemplated. By the time she got to the church, the worship had already started. She slid into a back pew and just let the music wash over her. It thrilled her to see so many people from the college there. Dozens of students had come out on a Thursday night to seek the presence of God and the fellowship of other believers. She wondered how many of them had attended a service like this before. Even she, raised in such an overtly Christian home with very active church membership, had never truly felt the same way she felt at the worship service with her crew family. They sang, they prayed, they watched an amazing video testimony of one of the band members, they listened to a devotional message from Max Dominic, and they sang some more. Eventually, they met in the fellowship hall, eating snacks and breaking off into smaller groups. Madeline found herself talking to Elena Dominic, Max's wife. Elena wore a loose linen dress over her obviously pregnant belly. A green scarf tied around her head beautifully accented her coffee-colored skin. "That was an amazing band," Madeline said to the dynamic woman. They had become fast friends over the last year. "Yes, they're all music students who got together last semester. How blessed we are that they're part of our team now." As she rubbed at her side, Max and Joe walked up. "You feeling okay?" Max asked, concern in his voice. "I'm fine. No worries. Just really thirsty and yet tired of having to pee every 5 minutes." She pointed at Joe. "What will you do with the storm then, Captain Westcott?" Madeline let her curiosity overtake good manners. "What do you mean?" "Joe lives on a boat," Elena clarified. "Much too big of a boat to get out of the water." Madeline felt stupid. She'd heard that Joe lived on a boat, but had forgotten. "That's not entirely true," Joe retorted. "I could get it out of the water, but with the storm threatening the entire coast from Panama City to the Delta, I probably couldn't find anyone free to do it." Madeline thought of the storms she'd experienced in her life. "What will you do then?" He casually shrugged. She tried to go along with the thought that if he didn't appear concerned, she shouldn't feel concerned either, but it proved difficult having seen the Florida coastline after a hurricane. "They still don't know the track. I can either sail out of the way and come back when the storm passes, or I can pack up what I don't want to lose and just pray." Madeline ran her tongue over her teeth. If she felt stupid a minute ago, she set herself up to feel really dumb now. "Red-headed Westcott from Providence, Rhode Island. Living on a big boat. Are you by chance a Westcott, Marine Westcott?" The angry flash in his eye surprised her. "How would you know that?" Max laughed out loud. "She pinned you down, brother." Unsure of the source of the unnatural vehemence she heard in his tone, she held up a hand. "Just curious, honestly. My father once bought and sold a boat manufacturing company in Boston. He used it to help me see the paperwork trail of the flipping of a company like that. I remember, in Boston anyway, they like to think they're somewhat of a business rival. That's all. I know there's a couple of sons among the brothers who own Westcott Marine. Are you one of the sons?" "Viscolli." His eyes narrowed. "Madeline Viscolli. So that would be the same Viscolli Enterprises that saved Elohim Boats from bankruptcy?" With a grin, she confirmed. "Yes. It was just Walter's watercraft when Papa bought it. Small world, huh?" "Oh, yeah. Small world." His voice lacked any detectable emotion. Then his eyes softened a little. "Elohim makes very nice boats, sleek and elegant, but sturdy and sound. Walter's built solid boats, but Elohim creates distinction. So does Westcott, Mr. Joe Westcott." He cocked his head. His voice went back to monotone. "Think so? I guess, maybe." While he stared at her, as if examining something fascinating, a thought occurred to her. "I don't get it. If you're a Westcott, Marine Westcott, then you should have plenty of access to transport for your boat that's too large to get out of the water, right? You'd think so, wouldn't you?" He asked rhetorically, his voice remaining even, his smile forced. Then he stepped back and glanced at Elena and Max. "I'm going to call it a night, friends. Elena, beautiful brochures. Everyone who picked one up opened it. I watched." "Wonderful." She squeezed his upper arm. "You be careful biking out there in the dark." With the sudden attitude change, She thought he'd ignore her as he left, but he did turn back to her. "It was a pleasure, Miss Viscolli, as always. Have a good night, and I'll see you in small groups tomorrow." With a frown, she looked at Elena. What was that all about? The older woman stepped closer to her. "That is for him to tell you, lovely girl. I don't gossip even on a bad day, and today was a wonderful day." She gestured at the food table. "Let me see what kind of fruit I can scare up. Baby Max is craving some watermelon, and I swear I feel like I could drink a gallon of water." Madeline watched the weather report on her laptop screen with a worried frown. They had downgraded Leroy to a tropical storm, but now they certainly expected landfall in the Mobile area. She went into her pantry and checked supplies. With plenty of water, canned goods, and candles, she knew she could last several days. What concerned her most was Joe Westcott. Maybe she could call Elohim Boats and see if she still had any contacts there that could arrange a transport truck for a Westcott marine boat. Something told her Pastor Joe Westcott would not approve. Besides, he probably had access to identical resources. As a Westcott Marine Westcott, he probably had salt water in his blood. He did not need Madeline Viscolli to come swooping to the rescue. She shut the lid of her laptop and tried to pick up a textbook, the words all blurred together, making study impossible. After reading the same paragraph twice without absorbing a single word, she set the book back down. If she knew where he lived, she would go to him and insist that he come to her townhouse to ride out the storm. She had a basement if things got choppy out there. Except she had no idea how to contact him. Suddenly, remembering the phone list she had received last year, she pulled it out and ran her finger down the list of names until she came to his. Before she could talk herself out of it, she sent a text. "This is Maddie V. All battened down, Captain Joe?" It took about 20 minutes before he replied. In that time, she heated water and freshened her teapot. When the notification sound of an incoming text rang out, she almost dropped the pot. "Aye, aye, snug and secure, thanks for checking." Should she believe him? Silly question, really. It wasn't up to her. At least he texted back. Taking her teapot back downstairs to the study, she settled in with a textbook, determined to focus and actually learn something this time. About an hour later, she gave up. As the wind beat against her patio window, she went to her knees by her desk chair. With her head bowed and eyes closed, she prayed for Joe's safety. Then she realized she should actually pray for the entire city, so she elaborated on her prayer. Chapter 3. October. Joe Westcott parked his bike in front of the bakery. As he locked his bike, he could smell the fresh baked bread coming from inside. Hungry after the bike ride and chilled from the damp air, he happily strolled into the little restaurant. The yeasty smell of bread baking mixed in with the holiday scents of pumpkin and cinnamon. The sign by the cash register advertised a handy online order form for Thanksgiving cakes and pies. Unlike other establishments in the area, Paula's Bakery sported no Halloween decorations. "Morning, Joe," the 70-year-old owner Paula greeted. "Little early for this cool weather, huh?" "If the air were drier, it would be a lot better. After that ride, I could do with some of your hot coffee." He removed his bike helmet, fastened the chin strap to the shoulder strap of his bag, and absently and pointlessly attempted to smooth his hair back down. "Fresh pot's brewing right now. I'll bring it on over to you when it's ready. Take a seat." His eyes scanned the room, and he spotted Barbara Mullins, the reason for the early morning meeting. The freshman from Birmingham had her head bowed and sniffled into a paper napkin. As Joe approached, he felt his steps pause when he recognized Madeline Viscolli seated across from Barbara. As soon as he recognized her, he waited for the skip of the beat of his heart and the catch of his breath, and he disliked the feeling. Now, steeled against his reaction to her, he felt he could safely approach the table. He mentally wished Barbara would look up and scoot over to accommodate him, but she didn't even see him walk up. Instead, Madeline looked up at him, her ultramarine eyes shining like sapphires and a warm smile lighting up her face. He wondered, absently, why he couldn't ever see her as just another girl. How could a woman, devoid of any makeup, wearing a worn-out Florida Gator sweatshirt with her hair piled on top of her head, possibly look so beautiful that her loveliness could steal a grown man's breath? As she moved over for him, he took the time to slip the strap of his bag over his head and set it on the ground next to the table. When he slid into the booth, his hip and thigh brushed up against Madeline's, and he quickly but casually scooted back over a few inches. She spoke quietly. "Good morning, Joe. Elena called and asked me to come. She's not feeling well this morning." He nodded and looked at Barbara, praying silently, actually asking God for help to stay focused on the crisis at hand. He reached forward and touched her forearm. She jerked her head up, and he noticed the bruise forming around her left eye and the puffiness of her bottom lip. Anger flooded his body as a memory assailed his mind. He hadn't known the details, or he could have been prepared. He slid his hands into his lap and clenched his fists. "I think I can guess the problem." His voice sounded like steel to his own ears. "How can we help?" Barbara tried to speak, but began hyperventilating. Madeline reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "She says her dorm is safe, and she's decided to press charges. Right now, I don't think she needs any physical help." Barbara had regularly attended crew meetings for the last month. Her boyfriend did not like the changes in her after she started growing in her relationship with God. She had confessed to Joe just the week before that she worried about how angry he'd gotten. Frustrated with himself for ignoring the red flags, he gritted his teeth and tried to push back the feeling. "He's a student in school here, right? Athletic scholarship?" Barbara nodded. "Soccer." "Well, he's liable to lose his scholarship and get kicked out besides. Then he won't be able to come around anymore, mostly." He reached forward and gently gripped her wrist. "Barbara, listen to me. Understand that no matter what he or any of his friends may say to you, you're doing the right thing by pressing charges. No matter what anyone says, even family, it's the right thing to do. I don't want you ever to doubt that you're doing the right thing." He looked over at Madeline. "I'm happy you were able to meet her. I know you could get here faster than me." "I would have been happy to pick you up. Any time, Joe." He nodded absently. He had no intention of ever asking her for a ride. He liked his life right now, simple, straightforward, and unhampered by riches. Knowing now who Madeline Viscolli was, what her business ventures would look like in the future, the wealth of her family, he had absolutely no desire to muddy his life by entangling himself with her further, even if his body and heart seemed to disagree with his mind on that point. "Let's pray over Barbara, ask for a hedge of protection around her. Then we'll see about getting a hold of her friends to help see her through the next couple of days." He squeezed Barbara's wrist and let go, then held his hands out, palm up, for the two women to each take a hand. Ignoring how good and right it felt to hold Madeline's soft hand in his, he bowed his head and started praying. Madeline watched Barbara get into the front seat of her roommate, Patsy Mitchell's car. Patsy would drive Barbara to the police station to file her report, then drive her back to the dorm. After waving at them from the door, Madeline went back inside Paula's and back to the table. Instead of sitting beside Joe again, she slid into the booth across from him. His eyes held a distant, almost fierce look before he focused on her. When he met her gaze, he gave her his most practiced, bland smile. "All set, Madeline?" He made a move as if to pick up his bag and helmet. "Maddie, Joe. Do you want me to start calling you Joseph all the time?" His expression didn't change. "You can call me Joseph, that's fine." Madeline shook her head. "Whatever." She reached across the table toward her now cooled cup of coffee and could have sworn that Joe nearly flinched at the movement. "Want to tell me what that was all about?" He raised an eyebrow and tried to act like he didn't know what she was talking about, but his body betrayed him and his cheeks flushed with color. What was about?" "Come on, Joe. I saw how angry you got when you realized what happened to Barb. Anyone could have seen it." She watched his jaw clench and a muscle tick. He scrubbed his hands through his beard and pushed away from the table. "It's nothing, Madeline. I have a meeting on campus. I need to go." "Maddie, and I'll drive you." She stood with him, enjoying the way she had to look up at him. For over a year, she'd spent hours and hours with him, always in a crowd or in the company of others. His passion for God, his compassion for his students, his strength and leadership. She found herself looking forward to seeing him more than the time spent with crew. Beginning this school year, she'd tried to come up with ways for the two of them to spend some time alone, but he had rebuffed every offer and option. Since their first meeting, they had never spent time alone until this moment. It confused her, because until their conversation about Westcott Marine, he sort of gave off signals that he just might find her as interesting as she found him. He shook his head. "Can't leave my bike here." Coincidentally, my Land Rover has a nice empty bike rack." As she spoke, the walls of the little building shook with the sound of thunder, and the skies opened up, sending down a sheet of rain that curtained them inside, isolating them from the rest of the world. "And, by the way, it's raining," she added with a grin. Joe sighed and closed his eyes. When he opened them, he had the stoic, blank look on his face again. "In that case, I appreciate the ride. Thank you, Madeline." Elated, she resisted the impulse to jump up and click her heels together. Instead, she grabbed her bag, snatched some cash out of her wallet, and tossed it onto the table and prodded, "Let's go." At the doorway, she hit the unlock button on her key fob, then dashed to the back of the car. Seconds later, Joe met her with his bike, and she helped him secure it into the bike rack. By the time they got inside the car, water dripped from their soaking wet clothes. "This weather," she exclaimed with a laugh, starting the engine and flipping the heater on full blast, "is insane, but it's still better than Boston." "Could never ride a bike full-time in Boston." He swiped the water off of his face while Madeline dug through a basket in the back seat and pulled out a roll of paper towels. She held them up triumphantly. "Saved by the mama with the preparedness streak." Using several paper towels padded together, she wiped the water off of her face and hands and handed him the roll. Once she was as dry as she could get, she used the damp batch to try to get some of the moisture out of her hair. In seconds, she'd soaked the whole stack. Something he said made her pause in her ministrations. "Couldn't ever? Did you live in Boston?" He shook his head. "Originally from Providence, remember? I went to college in Boston." Intrigued, she turned her body toward him. "Really? Where?" His lips thinned, and he shook his head exactly once. "Harvard, if you must know." When he said it, she realized that it didn't surprise her. He certainly was smart enough to have attended Harvard, and he was a Westcott Marine Westcott, so why not Ivy League? But even so, something about him never screamed Ivy League to her. "Well, Joe, I must say I find that fascinating." He raised an eyebrow. "You find it fascinating that I graduated from Harvard?" "Of course not." She looked him in the eye while she spoke. The way he looked away at her next words intrigued her. She noted his reaction only because she watched carefully. "I'm fascinated by the fact that you know I'm from Boston, yet you've never, in all of the months we've known each other, brought it up." She turned back around, her wet jeans sticking to the leather seat a bit. "So where to, Harvard?" "Student Ministries building on campus." As she eased out into the traffic, the rain lightened considerably. "Look there," she said, pointing to the lightening sky. "It's as if God was trying to get us into the car together." "You think it's funny?" His voice had burst out, angry and impatient, but he immediately sighed and rubbed his eyes. "I apologize. This morning was very stressful for me." They drove in silence for about half a minute before Madeline softly asked, "Can I ask you something?" She could hear his grin. "You just did." At a stoplight, she turned her head to look at him. "Who did Barbara remind you of?" His lips tightened, and he gave a slight shake of his head. "Haven't your insightful little powers of observation revealed to you that I truly don't want to discuss this?" He gestured at the light. Green. Wanting to lighten the mood in the vehicle, she searched her brain for some point of reference. "I remember the t-shirt you wore the day we met. That restaurant is my favorite place to eat in the Keys. Well, one of my favorites." "The Grouper place?" "Yes." "Mine too. They have that grouper sandwich I've stood in line half an hour to eat." "I've had it." Thinking about it made her feel a twinge of homesickness. It wasn't as bad this year as it had been in the last 4. Perhaps she had started to grow up and away from her family just a bit, which was good and bad, she thought. For the rest of the drive, they stayed on safe topics like restaurants and beaches. She found out that Joe had sailed from Providence to the Keys and had stayed there for a year before accepting the crew position 2 years ago. "I spent half the summer down there this year. It was nice to be back." "Why do you still live on your boat?" He shrugged. "She's a nice size, big as any one bedroom I could get here. She keeps me busy, and she's become home." "Will you be going back to Providence for Thanksgiving?" He didn't answer immediately, which made her sneak a quick glance at him while she drove. She caught his hardened expression, his jaw tight. Then he visibly relaxed. "No, I'll probably just stay here." Madeline pursed her lips, 1,000 questions screaming in her mind. She wanted to know more about him on a social level, yes. She really wanted to know what had clearly hurt him so badly in the past. When they reached the Student Ministries building, she set the parking brake and shifted the gears into neutral so that she could turn in her seat to face him. "I don't think this weather is going to clear any time soon. I'm happy to give you a ride back." As he unclipped his seatbelt, he smiled at her warmly. "I appreciate it, but it will probably be all clear by the time I'm done. I'll catch the bus if it's still raining." Madeline had honestly never encountered such blatant disregard, and since she really didn't have a personality that backed down, it didn't faze her. "Why? Why what? Why won't you allow me the opportunity to give you a ride, Harvard?" His hand paused on the door handle. "Because," he said, turning to look at her, his eyes serious. "I try very hard to never be alone with a female student. Ever. I would rather avoid any possibility that my motives or actions could be misinterpreted by anyone, regardless of the real situation." She couldn't help feeling somewhat defensive. "I'm not some 18-year-old freshman, Joe. I'm a second-year grad student working on my master's." Nevertheless, he dug in his pocket and pulled out a $10 bill, which he set on the dashboard, then opened the door and hopped out into the rain. "For your gas. Don't get out. No reason for you to get soaked again. Thanks for the ride. Really." While he unhooked his bike from the rack, she rested her elbow on the car door and tapped her chin with her finger. She contemplated his attitude and words. She concluded that she didn't fully accept his answer. It really had nothing to do with his position on campus. Sure, that may play a role or serve as a factor in his attitude. Still, she knew there was something else. He pounded on the back door to let her know he had freed his bike. Unless she chased him down in the rain, she had no choice but to release the brake and drive away. Chapter 4. Madeline stared at the sleek, white sailboat docked at Slip 67. Near the bow and the stern, the words Star Sapphire surrounded a blue oval with a brilliant white starburst in the center of it. The bright white of the ship's deck nearly blinded her in the radiant November sunlight. A dark blue canopy stretched over the bridge of the boat, and the line of sleek portholes rising up out of the center of the deck gave evidence to the living area below deck. She could see the sails stored and ready among perfectly coiled ropes. She knew she'd found the right boat. His bike sat next to a small grill on the dock. Both were chained to the dock railing. What confused her, and had caused her to walk the length of the dock and back once already, was that this was not a Westcott boat. It was an Elohim. Why would a Westcott Marine Westcott live on an Elohim vessel? It did not compute. She frowned, trying to mull that through when she saw the craft shifting in the still water as if someone moved around inside. Then she heard footfalls on stairs. Her heart gave a little flutter. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. She had a pretty strong backbone, and typically the opinions of others didn't overly affect her opinion of herself. However, an outright rejection from one Joe Westcott after the effort she put into this little surprise might just be her undoing. When she saw his head through the porthole, she shifted the sunglasses off of her face and onto the top of her head. "Ahoy!" she called, loud enough for him to hear her through the gunwale. "Permission to come aboard, Captain?" Joe emerged onto the main deck with graceful, sure-footed motions born of years of practice. He spotted her, and as recognition dawned, his face lit in a blend of surprised smile and pale shock. "Madeline?" "Maddie," she corrected and hefted the picnic basket. "I come bearing a holiday feast." Instead of directing her on board, he hopped from his boat to the dock with the agility of an Olympic runner clearing a hurdle. His blonde goatee looked a little more shaggy than usual, like a man who hadn't shaved for a few days. He wore thin sweatpants and a long-sleeved Harvard t-shirt. Worn leather moccasins with rubber soles covered his feet. She felt a little overdressed in her wool pants and powder blue cashmere sweater. But she knew how the sweater made her eyes look a vivid blue, and after changing outfits about a dozen times, she'd settled on this one. "A feast?" He glanced at the picnic basket with a quizzical look in his eye. "Yes, a Thanksgiving feast." She held the basket out to him and watched as he reflexively took it. "Since you didn't have any apparent plans for Thanksgiving, I decided to take the chance and cook a meal for us." He didn't move. "What makes you think I don't have other plans?" Unfazed, she said, "Because Elena had her baby 2 days ago, and besides, you haven't shaved." She brushed her hands and gestured toward the Star Sapphire. "If you'll show me to your galley, I'll just heat up what's gone cold." He didn't seem to realize that he put a hand up to his chin before looking at the basket, then at her. Finally, he stepped back and gestured at the boat. "Permission granted. Welcome aboard." He led the way to the wooden gangplank ramp that spanned the distance between the starboard side bow and the dock. "Please watch your step. Last night's rain made it a little slippery." Excited, she sprang forward and followed him on board, across the deck of the boat and under the canopy. She saw the controls, buttons and levers and gauges, and an honest-to-goodness wheel to steer the boat in the aft section. He didn't stop at the bridge, though. Instead, he descended through a square hole in the deck and down a set of wooden stairs. She followed him down the staircase, which was nearly as steep as a ladder, emerging into a beautiful living area with teak wood floors and paneling. Next to the staircase on the port side sat a cream-colored leather desk chair at a cubby with radios, a nautical GPS, and a small black screen built into the wall. She assumed it had something to do with some kind of sonar. His laptop sat amidst the equipment. To their starboard lay the galley, an U-shaped kitchenette with a 4-burner gas stove and a small built-in oven beneath it, a wide chrome-faced refrigerator that sat under a length of black marble-clad countertop, and a stainless steel sink with black marble-clad counters around it. Beyond the galley, she spotted the living area. A cream leather couch ran the length of the wooden hull to starboard and curved around to the bow where it ended at a doorway. Beyond the door, she could see a large bed. Across from the couch on the port side, a small dining area nestled into the bulkheads between the equipment desk and the other side of the bedroom doorway. Above the dining area, a small, flat-screen television with the volume muted displayed a college football game. The kitchen area looked spotless, and the entire living area lay in complete order before her. Even the bed beyond the doorway was made. Joe walked to the bow and sealed the port leading to his bedroom, hiding his bed from sight before turning back to face her. "Expecting company?" she asked, curious about the tidiness. "No, I wasn't," he answered ironically. He gestured toward the galley area. "Can I help you with anything?" As she set the basket on the small counter, she opened the lid and started pulling out plastic containers of food. "Can you set the table?" About 30 minutes later, they sat at the little dining nook in front of the spread of roasted and sliced turkey breast, mashed potatoes, stuffing, roasted sweet potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts, and homemade rolls. Madeline sat across from Joe and placed a napkin in her lap. He looked at the food and then at her, his green eyes filled with emotion she couldn't quite identify. Then he spoke. "This is my first home-cooked Thanksgiving meal in about 13 years. Wanting to ask questions but deciding to let him lead, she held out her hand. "I'm thankful we could spend it together. Would you mind blessing the meal?" He covered her open hand with his fingers wrapped around her palm. His grip felt carefully light and warm, though she could feel the strength in his fingers. He prayed a simple prayer, thanking God for the food and the fellowship. She enjoyed holding his hand, and regretted the moment the prayer ended. While they filled their plates, she said, "This is my first Thanksgiving without my family in my entire life." His eyebrow twitched. "Why didn't you go home?" As he spoke, he loaded mashed potatoes on his plate. "I still have a paper due Monday. I can't work on a plane. I get motion sickness very easily, especially on Papa's corporate jet. It's so little. I do better on a bigger plane, and the flights are so crowded this time of year." As she handed him the gravy, she smiled when he met her eyes. She made a mental note to stop babbling. Spooning gravy over half of the items on his plate, he asked, "So, how does preparing this amazing-smelling meal equal you finishing your paper?" "I wrote it yesterday. I'm giving it a day, then I'll go start proofing it." She started to launch into the theme of the paper before she remembered that she had stopped babbling. Instead, she sliced into her turkey meat, relieved that it didn't look too dry. Thinking back to his statement, she asked, "How is it that you didn't celebrate Thanksgiving? Did your family not do holidays?" His hands paused in cutting his meat for just a second, long enough for her to see it and identify it, before he resumed his task. His voice remained pleasant while he answered. "I went to a military boarding school from 6th grade on. I never really went home during Thanksgiving break. The cooks always did their best to give the boys who stayed a nice meal." He held up his fork. "But nothing like this. Thank you. I appreciate the thought. These Brussels sprouts are really good. How did you do that?" "Tossed with olive oil and fresh ground black pepper, then lightly salted and roasted in a hot oven." "That's it?" "That's it. Lets the flavor of the sprouts shine through. My Aunt Maxine taught me that trick. She's a great cook." Madeline took a bite of sweet potato, savoring the buttery sweetness. She tried to keep the conversation light. She shared about her Aunt Maxine and Uncle Barry and her first cousins, the twins, and even shared a few childhood stories. That led to a few stories involving her Aunt Sarah and Uncle Derek and their children. Finally, she recounted about her visit with her brother and his new wife in England a year ago, and how she would see them, along with her parents, in the Keys next month. During the course of the meal and the conversation, Joe informed her that his grandfather had died suddenly just after Joe turned 4. Heart attack, everyone thought. Joe never knew his grandparents on his mother's side. He had never felt close to either of his aunts or uncles or any of his cousins. When the conversation at last turned to his immediate family, he didn't mention his father. He confided he had neither brothers or sisters. Then at last he told her that his mother had died shortly after he graduated from Harvard. When Madeline asked how, all he said was, "It was sudden." He took a long sip of water and changed the subject, asking, "So what are you thankful for, Miss Madeline Viscolli?" "Joe, I would be so thankful," Madeline grinned, "if you would call me Maddie." He smiled and said, "Seriously, what are you thankful for?" She sighed and sat back. "Okay, I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful my Aunt Maxine is such a good cook and taught me my way around the kitchen so I could make us this meal. I'm thankful you were here and we could share it together. I'm thankful that I didn't have to spend my first Thanksgiving away from my family alone. I'm very thankful to God for all of his blessings in my life. You're one of those blessings, you know." His expression didn't change. "What are you thankful for, Pastor Joe Westcott?" "What am I thankful for?" He grinned. "Well, I'm thankful for my friends here and all the students and crew, including you. I'm very thankful you thought of me and brought me this delicious meal today. I'm thankful for my church. I'm thankful that I had the freedom to be here and to live the life I chose in service to God's ministry." She heard his emphasis on the word chose. She also reflected that he didn't once mention his family. After she chewed and swallowed, she added, "I knew you'd be alone today, so I thought I'd share the holiday with you." He set his fork down and sat back against the padded bench. She watched his expression, noting how he seemed to be warring with himself. "Madeline, my rules pertaining to the students I work with aren't going to go away." With a smile, she picked up her water glass. "I don't believe you, you know." "You don't believe me, huh?" He frowned. "Why is that?" "Because you're attracted to me despite your rule." She set her plate aside and crossed her arms on top of the table, leaning toward him. Remembering how Ruth had courted and eventually even proposed to Boaz, she decided to just stick with bold. "Because you feel this thing between us just like I do. You're just ignoring it. I don't think you can continue to ignore it much longer." Joe pushed away from the table and picked up their empty plates, carrying them to the sink. Without a word, he flicked on the water at the sink and added dish detergent. Madeline started clearing the table, bringing the containers of food with her. While she repacked her picnic basket, Joe washed the dishes that they'd used. It took them less than 10 minutes to clear and clean up. Soon, all traces of the meal she'd prepared had disappeared. After fastening the basket, she turned around in the small galley and found him leaning back against the sink, legs crossed in front of him, arms crossed over his chest. The ceiling appeared custom-made for his height. He looked relaxed and at ease and completely approachable. She crossed the small space and stood next to him, turning so that she could lean against the sink too. Standing like that, she looked at the steps that led up to the bridge and could see the bright blue sky above. Her shoulder brushed against his upper arm. "There's nothing more revealing of God's majesty to me than the open ocean," he said. "Why an Elohim yacht? I would think a Westcott would own a Westcott marine yacht." He shrugged. "Elohim makes nice boats." While it wasn't really an answer, she decided it was the best answer for which she could hope today. "I've spent a lot of time on the water, especially down in Florida. I don't get seasick. Or at least, I never have. I sometimes get airsick, though." With a sigh, he uncrossed his arms to rub the back of his neck. "I spent a year out there alone, only coming in for much-needed supplies. During that time, I sought God and prayed and begged him for answers. I really just wanted answers." She turned her head and looked up at him. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I didn't find answers, but I found peace." He straightened and shifted so that he stood in front of her. He smiled very gently. "The last thing I expected was peace, but he gave it to me anyway." Putting a hand on the counter on either side of her, he boxed her in. Madeline felt the heat of his body as her pulse rate rose. She worried he might see her heartbeat racing in the vein of her neck. The last thing I want right now is a relationship, especially with... Breathless, she waited for him to finish his thought, but he never did. When she knew he wouldn't continue, she answered him. Maybe God has a plan too. Maybe God intends to give you what you need, which is not necessarily what you want all the time. She licked her lips. You know, peace. Me. Without warning, he shifted his weight to one hand and cupped her cheek with the other. His calloused palm felt warm and rough, and conversely gentle against her smooth skin. She stared up at him, desperate to know the thoughts going through his head. His next words didn't make sense at first. Madeline, I need you, he began. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. Very slowly and clearly he said, I really need you to go away. With that, Joe straightened and bounded up the steep steps, snatching up the picnic basket as he went. What just happened? 1 second, she just knew he was about to kiss her. The next millisecond, he's telling her to leave? What did that mean? Frowning, she followed him out into the November breeze. The marina, for the most part, lay quiet all around. She could see a thin trail of smoke from someone's grill several hundred yards away, but saw no one else. As she stepped above deck, she looked around and saw Joe already standing on the dock, the picnic basket at his feet. Moving cautiously along the narrow gangways of the boat, she crossed the vessel and walked down the ramp. When she got within a few steps of him, he picked up the picnic basket without speaking and started walking down the dock toward the parking lot. She hustled her steps and caught up to walk beside him, but remained silent. As they neared the end of the dock, he spoke. This is a new boat here, he stated casually, gesturing toward a huge white hull that looked like it swamped the rest of the vessels around it in size. It was built in Norway. The couple came from Morocco. They're trying to do an around-the-world thing, and they're getting ready to head south toward Panama tomorrow. With a frown, she bit her lip against telling him how much she didn't care right now. The rest of the way to her car, they didn't speak. He walked around to the back and simply waited for her to unlock the doors so he could set the picnic basket in the rear compartment. The food secured, he walked around to where she stood next to the driver's door. He paused in front of her, mere inches away from her. Looking up at him, she said, I don't understand. You don't really need to. You just need to leave, he said. He lifted his hand and started to touch her face, but pulled it back without touching her. Joe. Before she even finished saying his name, his lips swallowed the sound. Without warning, her senses became overloaded with the feel, smell, and taste of him. She didn't need any encouragement to slip her arm around his neck and step closer to him. She liked the tickle of his beard. She loved the feel of his hard chest against hers. Wanting to get closer to him, she stood on her toes and wrapped both arms around him. As quickly as the kiss began, it ended. He put his hand against the back of her head as he ripped his mouth off of hers. She buried her face against his neck as he rested his cheek on top of her head, holding her close to him. Leave. Now, he repeated, and she felt the words as much as she heard them. Please, just go away. Why? He put his hand on her shoulders and stepped back. When she looked up at him, he cupped her cheeks with his palms, framing her face. Because I can't be in a relationship with anyone right now. Then I'll wait. She raised a hand and covered his heart with it. I know that. Go home, Maddie. He had finally called her Maddie, but his green eyes had gone gray and now stormed with emotion. Don't come here again. Joe took the offered mug of coffee from Larry Grant. Larry pastored at Joe's church, and the two men had become fast friends despite a 40-year age difference. He enjoyed the company in the quaint little house every single time he visited, which he often did after church services or church functions. Today he had knocked, and Larry had answered with a countenance that anticipated a door-to-door salesman. Upon seeing Joe, his expression transformed into one of initial joy, then to contemplation before he greeted. Well, happy Thanksgiving, young man of God. You missed dinner, but there's pumpkin pie and coffee. They moved into the now familiar den. The 2-story brick house had originally been constructed in the early 20th century with small rooms, tall ceilings, and a wraparound porch. Larry had often recruited Joe as his assistant at various home improvement projects. While maintaining many original fixtures, the entire house had been rewired, all the windows had been replaced with modern vinyl-clad glass, and the plumbing had been updated, though the cast-iron clawfoot bathtub had survived. Larry had also contracted installation of central air conditioning, which certainly made the southern Alabama summers a bit more bearable and probably accounted for Joe's frequent visits. Where were we? Larry tossed another piece of split wood onto the fire before sitting down across from Joe at the chessboard and lifting his own warm mug of coffee. Let me see if I can remember. Oh yeah, it's been your move for 2 weeks. Joe leaned back and took a sip of the strong brew. From the kitchen, he could hear Larry's wife, Anna, washing dishes. Larry studied the board and finally moved a bishop. After about 3 seconds, Joe moved his knight out, putting the bishop in jeopardy. Something's on your mind, son, Larry observed, his eyes studying the board. You haven't once mentioned the beating the Patriots handed the Titans last week. Joe took another sip of coffee, thought about ignoring the insight, then rejected the thought. He really needed to talk with someone to get out of his own head. It was the reason he had come here in the first place. There's this girl. I see. Larry sat back and interlaced his fingers over his stomach. Is she in some kind of trouble? Joe shook his head. I don't think so. I think I might be. Larry grinned. Oh, it's like that. He pointed a finger at him. You know, young man of God, there's an old saying that goes, it always starts with a woman. I don't know if that's in the Bible, Joe replied with a smile. Paraphrasing. Read Proverbs, boy. Half that book backs up that quote. Heck, so does Genesis, come to think of it. He settled back into his chair, and Joe knew that the chess game was not going to continue tonight. Tell me about this girl that troubles you so. Her face swam before his vision. Well, she's beautiful. Like, there aren't even words beautiful. Her beauty takes my breath away. With a small laugh, he shook his head. I've never imagined myself saying that before. Every man should be lucky enough to say that. He gestured toward the kitchen. My Anna, let me tell you. Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. He cleared his throat. When you going to bring her to church? I wouldn't hold your breath if I were you. Say again? I don't think I'll ever bring her to church. Oh, she's some kind of atheist? No, she's a Christian. A very strong Christian. Then bring her to church. I can't wait to see what kind of girl can get you in trouble. With a sigh, he said, I can't be with her. Larry's shaggy gray eyebrows came together in a frown. Why? She married? No. Engaged, then? No. Is she a blood relative of yours or something? Joe just raised his eyebrow. They won't let her out on work release or grant time off for good behavior? She's not in prison. Well, then I am at a loss. What's the problem, son? His heart twisted when he thought about her asking him the same question yesterday. She's richer than dirt. She's just here going to school, then she'll head back to her Boston penthouse to run her father's company. Larry let out a long sigh. Joe, you know that I've always been impressed with your alleged intelligence. Alleged now, is it? Money didn't cause your problems, son. It was Joe's turn to laugh. You have no idea. What do you think the Bible says about money? Impatience made his voice sound terse. I know what it says. Larry raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me with your biblical scholarship. Money is the root of all evil. With a shake of his head, the older man replied, Not exactly. It says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. He leaned forward and put a hand on Joe's knee. I think it's very clear that not every kind of evil has roots in the love of money. I think you and I both know perfectly well that there's all kinds of evil in the world other than the love of money. Images of a large garden bathtub and a pool of blood covering black and white tiles flashed through his mind. Yes, he conceded with gritted teeth. Just because this girl comes from money doesn't necessarily mean she has an evil love of money. You think she does? Joe thought about how Madeline drove herself and flew commercial, about how she cooked her own meals and dressed simply. She had access to wealth, but she chose to live alone in a townhouse instead of in a penthouse apartment with servants and a chauffeur on call. I don't know. Larry cleared his throat with a harumph sound. I don't think her money has much to do with anything at all. I think you're just afraid. I beg your pardon? First of all, you're afraid you might love money too much or in a sinful way yourself. Tell me I'm wrong." Joe sat up straighter and tried not to sound defensive. "You and I already talked and prayed about that." Larry nodded. "Exactly. So that's one thing." He leaned forward and wagged a finger in Joe's direction. "Even more, though, I think you're afraid of what you might become. I think you're afraid you'll snap again one day and end up just like him. I think you're forgetting just who you are in God's eyes and who lives inside of you." He leaned back again and picked up his own coffee cup. "You, young man of God, are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Whatever you might have once feared lived inside you, whether it ever even existed, is long gone. You've run from it your entire life. But it ain't there, boy. You can't hide something like that in a heart that's possessed by the Holy Spirit." "I don't think that's it." Joe held up a finger to forestall his friend from speaking again right away. He sat forward and very seriously considered his friend's words. In his mind's eye, the lovely face of Madeline Viscolli evaporated, replaced by unwanted memories. The back of his mind echoed with harsh screams, sick panic, and bellowed orders. Mostly, he remembered pain and rage, and those sick feelings of helplessness and frustration that accompanied the pain and rage. He remembered his mother weeping. He remembered loneliness and despair. He forced his mind back to the present. After he reflected upon it, he took a breath, then announced, "Honestly, I don't feel like I'm afraid. I haven't been afraid of anything or anyone in a very long time." "But Joe, this one scares you, doesn't she? She sees all the way inside your heart and makes you feel all sorts of gooey and vulnerable. She makes you feel like you can't be near her without her seeing all that pain from your childhood that you simply want to leave in the past. It's like she can reach around all your thorny defenses and expose that soft little underbelly you try so hard to never let the world see. That scares you. Admit it." Joe thought about how he felt whenever he spent more than a few minutes with Madeline Viscolli. "That sounds right. I don't know if it scares me exactly, but I don't like it. I don't like feeling like she can see everything about me." Larry smiled. It was, perhaps, a smile of understanding. "Son, you know what that makes you? It makes you a man, and a normal man at that. You had trauma in your life. Most men have. Not everyone can live a life of leisure, especially if you hear the call and follow it to do God's work. I know what it's like. You know I was a young chaplain in the war, sent a lot of our boys home in boxes. When I finally came back from overseas, Anna and I had a hard time. It went on longer than it should have because I was stubborn and stupid. I didn't trust her to understand what I had been through, and I didn't fully trust God for putting the two of us together. The fact is, she's the only person I could fully trust with all that stuff, all the terrible things in life that are too much for just one man to bear alone. It took a while to realize that God made her. Listen to me, son. God made her to help me put all that stuff where it goes. He designed her specifically and especially for me, and likewise me for her. Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. One flesh. One. I just had to learn how to fully trust God and trust her again." Joe had never heard Larry speak so frankly about these kinds of emotions. The sincerity of the words made him realize that his own feelings probably weren't so alien. "I really don't trust her, Larry. Her family is too wealthy," he confessed. "Actually, it sounds like her money is just your excuse. You won't let yourself trust her because you don't trust yourself around her. And you don't fully trust God for bringing the two of you together. You had your own plan for your life, and you'd rather God just listen to your instructions and follow your plan, right? But it doesn't work that way. This isn't your world, and you are not God. You are not in charge here, Joe. He is. God has plans for you, and his plans for you are good. You have to fully trust him and surrender to his plan, and you don't want to. I can see it in your eyes. The very thought of it scares you to death, son. You're fooling yourself if you believe otherwise." The words from his overly insightful friend swirled around in his mind. Could he be right? Had he been running? Had he been afraid? What if you're wrong? You think I'm wrong? Tell you what. The seriousness and the concern left Larry's eyes. He had said his say, and he knew that the younger man had ears to hear. He grinned and said, "If I'm wrong, I'll wear a Patriots jersey to preach in on Sunday. You have my word. That should tell you how serious this conversation is to me." With his lips twitching back into a smile, Joe replied, "You realize, don't you, that despite how broken and shattered my life will be, I'll call you on that." "Oh, I'll be ready. Now, what if I'm right, son?" "What do you mean?" Larry chuckled. "If I'm right, I think you really are in serious trouble with this girl, and I look forward to seeing her in church one Sunday." Chapter 5. When the doorbell rang for the second time, Madeline pushed herself away from her desk and made her way to the door. She cringed a bit when she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror by the entrance. She'd pulled her hair into 2 braids, and some of the hair ends poked out of the once smooth plaits. She wore an oversized blue and black flannel shirt over a pair of black yoga pants. After the scene at the end of dinner the night before, she'd come home and spent several hours having a conversation with God. She ended the conversation with the same understanding she'd had going into it, that the reason he had brought her to Mobile to work on her master's degree lived on a 50-foot sailboat named Star Sapphire, docked at slip number 67. That reason just didn't realize it yet, and Madeline wasn't to feel defeated. Accepting that, she'd cracked the books for her paper. Much later, she'd managed to sleep a few hours before getting back to it. While the rest of the country poured into shopping malls and discount stores for after-Thanksgiving sales, Madeline buried herself in economic theory. She made and then let 2 pots of tea cool one after another without even touching them. So when the doorbell rang, she ignored it the first time, assuming it was a delivery that could be left on her stoop. But with the persistent second ring, she thought maybe she ought to at least see who was at the door. When she opened the door and saw Joe Westcott, she felt her jaw drop open and her eyes widen. His rejection of her had felt so incredibly, final, that she had decided to give him a bit of space before seeking him out again. Now here he stood in her doorway. In contrast to her disheveled appearance, he wore loose khaki pants and a sweater the color of a stormy sea. He'd trimmed his beard, and she could smell the light musky scent of his aftershave. With a smile, she held the door wider. "Hi, Joe. Please come in." As he stepped into her home, she plucked at her shirt. "Sorry for the way I'm dressed. I was working on my paper." He glanced toward the study, clearly taking in the desk piled with books, then back at her. She couldn't help thinking about the stark order of his living conditions, contrasted with her own organized chaos. "Can we sit and talk somewhere?" "Of course." She gestured with her hand. "Come upstairs." He stared at his feet. Was he blushing? She suddenly realized what was making him uncomfortable and felt a little bit flattered. "Joe, the bedrooms are both on the 3rd floor. Come up to the 2nd floor. I won't bite." At the top of the 2nd floor landing, she gestured toward the couch. "Make yourself at home." He walked to the sectional couch and sat on the edge of the cushion. "Can I get you anything?" She put her hand on the back of the couch and leaned forward while she grinned. "I still have that pecan pie we never touched yesterday, and I have ice cream." He smiled in return. "That sounds wonderful. Maybe later?" Later worked for her. Later meant he didn't plan to bolt. Thankful she'd spent all night working on the paper so she could sit here guilt-free until whatever later meant, she perched on the curve of the couch and crossed her legs. "What's up?" He hooked his foot on his knee and stared at the tip of his shoe. "I apologize for being so rude yesterday." With a sigh, he looked at her. "With your kind permission, I would like to start over, if that's okay." "Sure thing, Harvard." She leaned forward and clasped her hands. "I mean, unless we're going all the way back to August of last year, I'd rather not start that far back." He chuckled. "I think I know what you mean." Without warning, he surged to his feet and crossed over to stare out the window. "This is a cool place. When I was at Harvard, I had a pretty similar setup." There he was, with some random thought that had nothing to do with the topic at hand. Following his lead, she stood and crossed over to stand next to him. It still pleased her that she had to look up at him. "Is this the starting over gig? Or are you working your nerve up to giving me some insight?" As he turned to face her, he slipped his hands into his pockets. "Do you know why I was sent to a military boarding school?" She grinned mischievously. Because you needed some extra discipline? Were you a bad boy, Joe? With a shake of his head, he replied, No, I wasn't. I got sent away because my father, who regularly beat my mother, had finally turned on me. The first time he beat me up, I was 10. He rubbed at his chin. I wear a beard to hide a scar I received when he threw me down a flight of stairs. I had apparently given him a look he didn't like, though I have no recollection of doing so. Madeline gasped and reached forward with her hand. Reflexively, he grabbed her wrist to freeze her motion. His grip was both firm and gentle at once, and she stared at the way his thumb and fingers overlapped on her wrist. 2 years and many terrible incidents later, my mom packed me up and sent me away. I stayed at school with the international students through the holidays, and during the summer, a team of nannies and traveling companions took me all over the world. I'd see her occasionally, and always begged her to leave my dad, so we could just be together somewhere until I got older and got a job. But she wouldn't do it. Madeline watched him fall silent, watched the storm raging behind his eyes, and tried not to even breathe so that she would not distract him from his coming words. She told me he really wasn't so bad. She told me his temper was her fault, too, and that she provoked him sometimes. She told me how great the school was and how much better off I would be when it came time for college. She told me a lot of things that make absolutely no sense in hindsight. Mostly, she told me we couldn't have the kind of life we enjoyed if she left him. He gently released her wrist, and silent tears fell from her eyes as she thought of the lonely, beaten boy who came before the man standing next to her. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sniffling, she frowned. In what way? What I'm saying is that if it hadn't been for her desire for material possessions and all the trappings of wealth, she could have left him at any time, and we could have just lived a simple life together. But those possessions meant more to her than I did, than her own life did. With a gasp, Madeline put her arms around him. He stiffened at first, but then put his right arm around her too. That's awful. Her voice sounded muffled against his sweater. They didn't show up for any of my awards or graduation ceremonies. She called me right after I'd graduated from college. He'd found another woman and was leaving her. I hadn't seen him in a decade, and I hadn't seen her in about 3 years. She sounded so terrible on the phone, so I went to go help her pack and move out. So his voice abruptly stopped, and Madeline somehow knew not to speak or move, just to wait until the racing thoughts and memories in his mind found their way to his next words. Eventually, he said, So I was the one who found her. Madeline heard the words and tried to make them not make sense, tried to make them mean something other than what she knew they meant. He disengaged from her and crossed his arms in front of his chest. For several moments, he stood silently staring out the window toward a point on the horizon 1,000 miles from where they stood. She felt his breath shudder, and he cleared his throat. She'd left a note that said she couldn't live without him. After a long pause, she asked, What happened next? His jaw twitched. Right before the funeral, I heard him say to his girlfriend that she'd saved him the cost of a divorce by offing herself. And Madeline, that was absolutely the last straw. I just snapped. I flat out snapped. Saw red. Heard a ringing in my ears and felt an all-consuming rage that drove me forward. His eyes slowly found hers, and he confessed, I attacked him and hurt him as much as I could. It took both my uncles to pull me off of him. Honestly, I think I would have killed him if they hadn't. I was that far gone. He stepped away from her and took 2 steps backward, his left hand massaging his right fist as if his knuckles still ached from years-old blows. I felt no remorse for what I had done to him, not one molecule of regret for the pain I brought to him. Instead, I felt sickened to my very bones that I had done it at all, that I had it in me to do something like that to any other living person, no matter who or how deserving. But I realized something. I realized that part of him lived inside me, too. She considered his words. Her mind rejected his notion of who he thought he was in light of the Joe she knew who taught, preached, prayed, and loved the students. He looked back out at the yard. You know what every living person needs? We need love. The only love I had ever really experienced was the love of Christ. So I decided I would just love him back. For the rest of my life, I would just immerse myself in God, in my work, and in the students who served in the ministry. I decided I could live my life alone, and celibate even if that's what God wanted. I completely resigned myself to just being alone. I've been alone up until now, so what difference could it possibly make? An excited little feeling fluttered in her heart. Until now? With a small smile, he looked at her again. I went to my pastor's house last night after you left, and he and I talked for a while. I went back home and I prayed a lot. I think maybe that's not where God wants me anymore. I'm not sure he ever planned that for me. So here's where I am. I am going to believe that Paul knew what he was saying when he said that in Christ we are new creations. I'm going to claim that the Holy Spirit banished that darkness out of me because John tells us that there is no darkness in God at all. So I'm going to trust that and believe that it's okay if I try to build something with someone. I don't have to worry about hurting her. Hurting you, Maddie. Does this mean you're going to quit pushing me away? Taking her hand in his, he said, I don't want to push you away anymore. Madeline didn't even notice the silent tears she shed. She couldn't hear her pulse roaring in her ears. Her feet felt light and her fingertips tingled. The sight of this wonderful, handsome man filled her field of vision. Joe took Madeline's hand, feeling exhausted and somehow cleansed by telling her about his past. He had more to say, but he didn't know how well it would go. There's one more thing, though. A worried look crossed her face. He wished he could take her into his arms and promise her that everything would be okay, but he knew it might not be. The ball would be in her court. What one more thing? She asked as she scrubbed the tears from her face. He pulled her toward the couch and gestured for her to sit, then picked a spot a full cushion away. Deciding the best thing he could do would be to just say it, he spoke, I do not like wealth. I reject it. Of all of the things that he expected from her, the lifting of an eyebrow in conjunction with a snort was not one of them. Yeah, right. Excuse me? Her eyes shone with mirth as she said, Okay, I get that you don't drive a car and you carry a second-hand canvas bag. Got it. But, Joe, you live on a boat worth what, $500,000? Despite the seriousness of the conversation, he felt his face fuse with color. Actually, quite a bit more when you buy it brand new. Right. Quite a bit more than $500,000 then. He cleared his throat. I bought it with the trust fund from my grandfather that matured after I graduated from college. I intentionally paid retail for a boat from my father's competitor. I realize it's an expensive vessel, but it's meant to last me for the rest of my entire life. Right, your life of solitude. Yes. She leaned back against the couch cushions and crossed her legs. Joe, living on a boat worth more than what 90% of the country could ever possibly afford does not equate to rejecting wealth. It could even equal a little bit of hypocrisy. Indignation flooded his chest, and he opened his mouth to respond, but she held up her hand. I'm not criticizing you or your feelings. I'm just saying that you can dislike what money does to people, or the suffering in the world due to selfishness and greed. But you really can't live on that boat and say you reject wealth when the bathroom stall is lined with teak wood and the counters are clad in Italian marble. Just because I live on a boat doesn't make me a hypocrite. Joe, all kinds of things can drive people to sin. It is hypocritical to hate the thing. If a father shoplifts a can of tuna fish because his children are hungry, that's sin. He's stealing. You can love him, love his kids, and still hate the sin. That makes sense. But the tuna is just a thing. Besides being illogical, it would be a little bit hypocritical to claim you hate the tuna while you yourself eat $500,000 worth of tuna. The tuna didn't drive him to sin. The hunger did. Money is just a thing. It doesn't make people sin. The love of money drives people to sin. So yes, it is hypocritical to claim you hate wealth while you live on a yacht. Understanding her logic, he gave a small nod. I see your point. He paused. I guess I'm not saying it right. Maybe I can try again. By all means. With a smile, she waved a hand in his direction as if bidding him to continue. My point is that I don't want to live my life the way I grew up. I don't want a mansion on the beach or fancy cars or private jets or upstairs maids or nannies. I simply do not. Resting his elbows on his knees, he laced his fingers together. I know that your future is running your father's empire, and that empire comes with hotels and limos and dinner parties. When she threw her head back and laughed, he straightened. What could he possibly have said that was so funny? Why are you laughing? Because you're assuming glitz and glamour, and I'm thinking of my Shunmather Caroline's ratty carpet and the fact that my grandfather got out of prison after serving time for murder when I was 10. With graceful movements, she slid over until she was right next to him. When you meet my family, you'll understand that you're wrong about them. Picking up his hand, she laced her fingers through his. And we don't have to fly in the private jet to get there. We can buy tickets and fly commercial like everyone else. In fact, I prefer it. While he wondered about the imprisoned grandfather, he said, However your family dynamics work, it doesn't change the facts. It doesn't change the life for which you're being groomed. She pressed her lips together and nodded. True. But truth be told, right now I'm looking at several more months of school before anything even becomes an issue. So I don't really understand what we're talking about here. He sighed. What we're talking about is that this spring you will graduate with your master's degree in business. This summer I'll take crew on a summer mission trip to Kenya. When we come back, I'll spend weeks in planning, and in August we'll gear up for the new school year to begin. I need you to understand that those are my plans. She tapped her finger on her bottom lip for several seconds before replying. I don't have specific plans yet. I've been waiting for God to reveal them. So, sounds like you do have a plan, and that makes one of us. She raised their joined hands. In the meantime, I really, really want to spend time with you and grow in a relationship with you. I've felt that since we met, and the way you acted yesterday tells me you've been feeling it too. She brought their joined hands to her cheek. Is that okay with you? Chapter 6. Joe put his arm around Madeline as she snuggled closer to him on the bench. The crisp December wind blew at them. When the University of Southern Alabama Jaguars scored their second touchdown, the two of them jumped up together and cheered along with the students and faculty all around them. Madeline pulled the red knit hat further down over her ears and blew into her gloved hands as they sat back down. Wow, it's cold. It's the humid air. Feels colder. I'm from Boston. I shouldn't feel cold in Alabama. He laughed and grabbed the red and blue checked blanket that had fallen off their laps, covering them back up. He couldn't believe that in a week's time he had grown this close to her. It honestly felt like they had been together his entire life. Having her by his side felt natural and right, and he wondered, very seriously, how he had ever even imagined he could have lived the rest of his life alone. We've made it past halftime. Are you ready to go? He asked, his lips close to her ear. When she turned her head to nod at him, he felt his heart beat faster. Her blue eyes shone like sparkling gems. The cold had made her nose and lips rosy red. About 20 minutes later, she poured boiling water over the tea bags in her teapot. He still felt cold and kept his coat on for the time being. Do you want to light the fire? She picked up the tray with the teapot and cups and carried it out of the kitchen. Sure. He looked at the gas logs and back at her. Where are the controls? She grabbed a blanket off the back of the couch and settled into the corner. Then she gestured. Just flip the switch. Pilot light should already be lit. He crossed the room and followed her directions. Seconds later, flames enveloped the gas logs. He slipped out of his coat and put it on the back of the couch before sitting next to her. In seconds, she had scooted closer to him, and he put his arm around her. A Christmas tree stood next to the window, decorated in Florida gator orange and blue ornaments and natural seashells and sand dollars. A garland of sea life swirled around the tree, shining in the blue and orange lights. Now that's an interesting tree. She chuckled. My cousin Rebecca is 13. She got all of the accoutrements for me for Christmas last year. I put the tree up to take a picture and send it to her. He picked up a strand of her hair and wound it around his finger. What a heart you have. Rebecca is your Aunt Sarah and Uncle Derek's daughter? Their youngest. My youngest cousin. Redhead like you. If you knew Rebecca, you'd do anything to make her happy too. She's been sick. He could hear the pain in her voice and felt a tug on his heart. While he stared at the dancing flames, he let his mind drift. Did you know that the first time a gas log was used was 1871? Madeline pushed away from him and looked up at him. How do you know that? The tip of her nose was still red, so he leaned down and kissed it. I have no idea how I know that. She laughed and settled back against him. I have to get back to my paper. I know. He glanced at his watch. Somehow, evening loomed. I have errands to run and work to do. But he was so content just to be here, her body pressed against his, the fire warming the room. Maybe 5 more minutes? She looked up at him. He couldn't help kissing her in agreement. Madeline sat on the leather couch on Joe's boat, typing the introduction to her paper. She sat with her back against the arm of the couch and had her feet in front of her, crossed at the ankles. Joe sat at his desk working on the order of ceremonies for the Christmas celebration. The sound of stringed Christmas music, fiddles and violins, accompanied by bass and harp, drifted from speakers hidden somewhere above her. She loved it. It reminded her of the music her Irish grandparents in Boston played. Pulled out of her paper, she took a moment to watch Joe work. He focused on his laptop screen, his fingers typing, his right hand occasionally using the mouse next to the computer. The light above his head highlighted the blonde streaks in his hair, giving him an almost halo-like appearance. He paused, staring at the screen, and absently rubbed his chin. Because she had looked, she knew the spot he rubbed carried the scar left by his father. The thought made her heart twist in pain. She couldn't fathom mistreatment at the hands of someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally. Even more, she couldn't imagine the callous disregard his mother had shown him. Thinking back to a conversation they'd had, she now understood what he meant when he said he'd found peace during his year on the ocean. She felt it demonstrated a caliber of character most men didn't possess when he came back to the real world and decided to work as a missionary for crew. He didn't go cry in a corner. He didn't rage at the world for the injustices he'd suffered. He didn't ingest chemicals and whine about a bad childhood. Instead, he took his orderly life, docked it in Slip 67, and worked for God, pouring his love out onto the students with whom he worked. Thoughts like these let her know that she loved this man. She hadn't fallen in love with him. It wasn't something that had happened to her like a fall. She had grown in love with him. It happened naturally, like growing from childhood to adulthood. She could barely remember a time in her life before now when she hadn't loved him. What are you thinking about? Startled, she focused back on him and caught him looking at her. Who knew how long she'd sat there staring at him? She couldn't very well tell him she was thinking about how she loved him. 2 weeks into a relationship shouldn't generate undying love. So instead she said, I was just wondering, how would you like to come with me to the Keys for Christmas? His lips thinned, and he started to look away. Rather than let him reject the idea outright, she said, If you say yes, I'll buy you a grouper sandwich. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then the grin stretched across his face. I'd love that. Thank you. Before she could fully celebrate, he added, I'll stay in a hotel, though. I hope you understand. He needed to be able to control his environment. She understood. Of course. In fact, I'll call the Viscolli and make sure you have a room. He cleared his throat. I'll take care of it. Knowing his response had to do with the cost of the room as much as the act of making reservations, she raised an eyebrow. Joe, please don't insult me by rejecting my hospitality. Clearly, he decided to pick his battles, because he laughed and said, Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'd appreciate it if you would make the reservation on my behalf. Madeline sat next to Joe in the student center, nursing a cup of coffee, reading over the printed copy of her paper. She had a red pen in her hand that she fidgeted with as she read. She looked up as Max startled her by pulling out the chair next to her. Hey, kids. Joe stopped writing in his planning book. Max? I've heard some news. He crossed his legs and tapped a long finger on the top of the table. I have it on good authority that there's a romance blooming between a student and one of my senior staff members. Madeline felt her cheeks flood with color. She darted a look at Joe, who simply grinned at Max. And? He queried. Max let out a sigh. And I don't think I have to caution you about any kind of perceived impropriety, or that I need to remind you that you are to strive to honor God in all areas of life. Joe raised an eyebrow. And yet, Madeline giggled as Max cleared his throat and said, And yet, here I am, doing exactly that. Joe let that hang in the air for a moment before he said, Feel better now, brother? Max grinned and nodded. Strangely, yes. He laughed. It sounded like he was enjoying a private joke. When he stopped laughing, his face had lost some of the serious discomfort it had displayed before. I'm not sure you could imagine the issues I've had to handle over the years. I have personally witnessed some of the issues you've had to handle, Joe said. I just would have thought that you wouldn't classify Maddie as an issue. I guess it's best for you never to assume. It really is best that I not. He pointed at the notebook. Is this for the Christmas party? Madeline went back to her paper, letting the two leaders put the finishing touches on the upcoming Christmas party. She hoped she could make it. As it looked right now, her paper might be done. But until she bound the final sheet of paper to the stack and had it ready to turn in, she could have absolutely no socializing that didn't include her working on the paper while doing it. Madeline walked into the classroom with 30 minutes to spare. There would be no classes today. Instead, the professor's teaching assistant sat at his desk, collecting the papers that the students had written while shedding blood, sweat, and tears. She put her printed and bound 200-page mini-thesis in the stack and gave him her name and student number. Once she saw that he had marked her off the list, she headed out the door. She had now completed her 11th semester of college. She just had one semester left. But as thoughts of Joe went through her mind, she remembered how God's timing is perfect every time, and that he brought her here to be here right now. Still, she didn't know what would happen once she crossed that stage at graduation. After shedding the millstone of paper, she felt 50 pounds lighter and almost like she walked on air. She glided to her car. Joe had a dozen meetings today, so she was free to do her own thing. She contemplated what to do. Christmas shopping sprang immediately to mind. Maybe she really should get started on that, seeing how Christmas loomed just 2 weeks away. Her family didn't do big Christmas gift-giving. They each had one name, and the only rule was that the gift had to be special and personal. She had pulled her sister-in-law, Faith's name, for the gift exchange. Knowing how her pilot sister would love it, she had bought a scarf worn by the American pilot Florine Miller Watson, who had been the first ever commanding officer of the Wasp at an auction. Except now she had Joe. What could she possibly get for her boyfriend? She always hated when she pulled her dad or brother or one of her uncles. She found men so hard to shop for. What could she possibly get the man when she had a feeling he'd be happy with a grouper sandwich? She drove to an independently owned Christian bookstore that she loved near Mobile's old downtown. Christmas hymns played while she browsed the books and made her way to the gift section. There, on a glass shelf, she found a brass and wood sailboat figure with a Bible verse etched in the brass sail. She loved it. How perfect for Joe. Taking the statue and a leather-bound journal she'd found to the cash register, she paid for her purchases, then checked her watch. She had time to get some laundry finished so that she could get packed for their trip to Key West. Chapter 7. Cora Anderson actually squealed when she saw her cousin standing at the baggage claim. The 20-year-old had her mother Maxine's straight black hair and emerald green eyes. Inheriting her father Barry's athletic ability and height, she currently played volleyball for a school in Virginia. "Maddie!" Cora greeted as the two women embraced. "I can't believe it's been a whole year since I've seen you." "You look fantastic." Madeline made a show of feeling Cora's biceps. "How do you stay so fit?" "Discipline." She kept the deadpan face for about 3 seconds before she burst out laughing. "That and Daddy sends me training texts every single day." She patted her flat stomach. "I'm on vacation right now, though. No gyms, no weights. Might even eat some processed sugar. Who knows? You're going to be a powder puff by the time Christmas break is over. You'll end up having to work extra hard. Now you sound just like Dad." She stuck her tongue out at her. "Way to ruin Christmas, cuz." Madeline snorted as she watched her bag come down the conveyor belt. Bag collected, they walked arm in arm out of the airport. Minutes later, they turned onto US 1 and headed north. "So how's Alabama?" Cora asked, stealing a quick glance at her cousin. Madeline smiled, thinking of Joe Westcott. "Would you believe I found the man of my dreams in Alabama?" She dug through her purse and pulled out her sunglasses, slipping them on her face. "Seriously?" "He's coming for Christmas." "You've never brought a boy home before. He must be something special." "I've never felt like there was someone worth bringing home." Looking back over the last few weeks, she felt a smile cross her face and felt a little flutter in her heart. "His family isn't close. I hope throwing him into the mosh pit of Viscolli Christmas won't scare him away." "Better to get it over with than wait another whole year before exposure." Cora laughed. "Besides, he'll get less of Uncle Tony's undivided attention this way." Madeline sighed and smiled. "Actually, I think Papa will like him. Your dad will approve of his taste in football teams. Uncle Derek will like his sportsmanship. I think overall they'll approve. So it's just his opinion you're worried about? She reached over and put a hand on her arm. You know what my mom would say. You should examine your feelings and consider their root. With a laugh, Madeline said, Seriously, Cora? When have I ever been prone to bad decisions and some sort of emotional rationalization? I don't think there's a track record for me there. She didn't add that Cora likely projected her own really disastrous high school experience. Even though nearly 3 years had passed, she knew without a doubt her cousin wasn't over it yet. I'm not concerned about how he'll like the family. I'm just curious and a little on edge about his comfort level during the festivities. It's not a small shindig, I don't have to remind you, and not a typical family Christmas. Cora didn't reply. Madeline knew that her younger cousin had just transported herself back to her senior year of high school. Wanting to fix it, she said, How's Chase doing? Cora's twin brother, Chase, played football in Texas. He's playing in a bowl game New Year's. Daddy, Mom, and I fly out the Wednesday before. She stuck her lip out. I'm disappointed he won't be here for Christmas. This'll be his second year. Football players don't get Christmas breaks, Madeline said, quoting her Uncle Barry. At least you were able to spend part of the summer with him. She pulled her phone out and sent a quick text to Joe. NFL, can't wait to see you next week. Once she sent it, she dashed off another one to her mother. With Cora en route. Who all is here so far? Cora kept one hand on the wheel and held her other up, counting by putting a thumb to each finger. Your parents, Faith, and TJ got in yesterday, and they're still pretty beat, so I haven't seen much of them. Me and my mom. Daddy's coming next week with the O'Farrells and your grandfather. Uncle Derek and Aunt Sarah won't be able to come until Christmas Eve. The kids are all in the Community Youth Christmas production the 23rd. At the mention of Derek and Sarah, she asked, How is Rebecca? So far, the last treatments are still the last. I haven't heard anything more. Me neither. She thought of their baby cousin, a fragile redhead with big, beautiful eyes. Wanting to change the subject, she said, You should see what I got Faith for Christmas. I found a flight scarf that once belonged to Florine Miller, the first WASP commander. Cora frowned. Women Air Service Pilots. She stifled a yawn. The auction last summer got hot and heavy. I can't believe I won it. Oh, and she was also the WASP chaplain for like 10 years. Your mother tells me there's a man in your life. Tony pulled out a chair to sit under the shade of the umbrella. He set his glass of lemonade on the table and stretched his legs out in front of him. They sat on the second-floor balcony of Tony and Robin's beach home. Madeline smiled. I do. He'll be here next week. She waved at her brother below her, who helped the long-time groundskeeper, Nelson, string Christmas lights into the palm trees that bordered the pool. It would have been good to have him here before everyone showed up so we could spend some one-on-one time with him. I agree. She ran her finger down the moisture on the outside of her glass. He's a crew missionary. Right now, he's in planning meetings for the rest of the week with his team. A missionary? Her father's eyes gleamed. Tell me more. He knew she'd always been part of crew. Now that she had some knowledge from Joe's side of things, she explained more about the administrative side of crew, the outreach, the mission trips, the student involvement. Her father asked her in-depth questions, and she did her best to answer them. She tabled a few to ask Joe about later. Tony pursed his lips and sat quietly after she answered the last question. So he does good work. Now tell me more about the man himself, he finally said. Out of nowhere, she felt hot tears sting her eyes. It surprised her, this emotional reaction. Unsure of where to start, she simply said, He had a terrible childhood. As she cleared her throat, Tony reached over and took her hand. I understand. She knew he did. As far as bad childhoods went, her father could probably win most competitions. He's alone. No family at all? Trying to decide what to say and what to keep close to her heart, she finally said, He has had nothing to do with his family for many years. As far as I know, they have nothing to do with him. How very difficult that would be. Maybe I had it easier by having no one at all. She studied her father's face, taking in the Italian features, the dark brown eyes, the graying at the temples, and wondered if he spoke sincerely or ironically. Never one to remain in the unknown, she challenged the proclamation. In what way? Well, when you're alone, you're simply alone. But he has to make a choice to not have his family in his life, and it would have to be a choice made at every holiday and every birthday. Any special occasion like a wedding or a baptism, really. Even funerals. That can't possibly be easy. She pulled her hand from his and took a long drink of lemonade. What do you know about Westcott Marine? Don't change the subject, Phelia. Actually, I'm not. Tony's eyebrows furrowed in concentration. I see. Well, I think I remember something, some sort of tragic news with one of the Westcott brothers' wife. Was she murdered? She shook her head. Suicide. È una tragedia. He shook his head. How is this related to your young man? She was his mother. She crossed her arms on the table and leaned forward. Papa, the way he grew up, an absolute absence of love. I am amazed he found God at all. Mia bella figlia. When you have no love, imagine encountering perfect love. Agape love. Unending love. The Bible tells us that God is love, and that every good and perfect thing comes from Him. When all you have is an absence of love, the love of God fills you to the point of an all-consuming radiance inside of you. He leaned back in his chair. There is nothing like it, and only people who have experienced it can explain the magnitude of it. He gestured in her direction with an open hand in a way that looked distinctively Italian. You have had such a good life. You are surrounded by an extended family who loves you and will do anything for you. I suppose it would be harder for someone raised like you to accept the love of God, because you would think you needed nothing else. Again, the emotions overwhelmed, and she almost started crying. I just don't know how. Her father cut her off. If you love him, and I will assume that you do because we have never talked of a man before, but if you love him, then all you do is that. You just love him and respect him. Don't try to make up for something he never had. Don't try to be anyone other than yourself. You, Madeline, love him as he is, with what you are, and respect him. Simplici. He smiled. Of course, sometimes it's trickier to actually do it than just say it. But there isn't a magic mathematical formula. The tears that had threatened suddenly dissipated. It's still rather soon, don't you think? I met him the first day of school last year, but we've only been dating since Thanksgiving. When it's right, God sometimes tells you right away. He grinned. Ask your mama how quickly I knew I was in love with her. I say it was love at first sight, but she insists it took a day or two. She hopped up and went behind his chair, putting her arms around his neck and kissing his cheek. Thanks, Papa. I'd worried. He patted her forearm. You should know better. I trust you, Maddie. Robin appeared in the doorway, holding a bowl of red frosting. Did you want to help decorate these gingerbread cookies? I made arrangements to have them at the fire station at 4. Madeline checked her watch. Sure, as long as I get to sample one. She straightened and added, or, 5. Joe stared at the envelope sitting on the galley counter. He pulled it out of his post office box yesterday morning, but still hadn't quite brought himself to open it. The return address was his father's palatial home near Providence, but the handwriting was a feminine hand that he did not recognize. He assumed it was from his father's current wife. Nothing good, he knew, would come from opening the letter. Before he could talk himself out of it, he ripped it open and pulled out the card. A cartoonish W in black and white tiger print filled the front of the card. Already he regretted opening it. On the inside, the simple note read, Your father is on his deathbed. It also contained the name of the hospital. He wadded it up and brought his fist up to his forehead, closing his eyes. A headache started somewhere near the base of his skull. His father was on his deathbed. Was that good or bad? How was he supposed to feel about that? He'd last seen his father's face bloodied and bruised from his own fist just 3 years ago. He couldn't possibly have sent for him. Maybe the new wife thought she would help her dying husband by bringing his estranged son home, though Joe couldn't imagine why she would think that would be a good idea. Making a sound of frustration, he threw the card across the room. It landed on the table, then skidded off and hit the floor. He tried to ignore it, but it screamed at him like a flashing light, and with a sigh, he picked it up and threw it in the garbage. His environment back in order, he went back to his bedroom and made an attempt to pack. When he opened the narrow closet, his hands brushed against his suit, the one he hung on to for weddings and funerals. His father was on his deathbed. Was he not supposed to care? He had spent a year on the open water of the Atlantic Ocean, coming to terms with the fact that his father didn't love him, had never even cared for him, and likely never would. So where did this feeling inside of him come from? the one that threatened to break down every wall he'd ever built up. From where did this little kid emerge that thought that maybe, if he came now, the man would suddenly realize he had a son for whom he loved and cared? He took the suit out of the closet and laid it across his bed. As he packed, he added shoes to match the suit, a tie, and a dress shirt, and he knew that he had decided where he would spend his Christmas. How would he tell Madeline? He'd have to just tell her, quick and simple and short, direct and to the point. No room to negotiate. Can't come meet your family whom you love. Have to go see my family for the first time since my mother's funeral, during which I physically attacked my father. Hope you understand. Shored up, he dialed her number. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He sighed and closed his eyes. He'd wanted to speak to her, but leaving a message worked for him too. Hey, Maddie, I won't be able to come to Florida. I have to go to Providence. Apparently, my father is sick and his wife has sent for me. He paused. What did he think he was about to say? Did he honestly just nearly deliver some declaration of love over a voicemail? I'm really sorry. I'll try to get there before the new year. He hung up and tossed his phone on the bed, then went into the main cabin to go online and see if he could find an available flight to Providence 3 days before Christmas. Chapter 8. The family sat in a cluster of vinyl chairs in the intensive care unit waiting room. He saw his 2 uncles, 2 of his 3 cousins, and his father's new wife. When Joe approached, their conversation stopped. His father's oldest brother, Martin, stepped forward and intercepted him before he reached the group. Joe, what are you doing here? She sent for me, he answered. No idea why. I assumed you all knew. You being here will only upset him. With a raised eyebrow, Joe replied, Wouldn't want that, would we? Don't ever want to upset Daddy. Someone might get hurt if he gets upset. Martin's face turned red and he looked away, no longer able to meet Joe's gaze. He added, Seems like my mom said that to me a few times in my childhood, Uncle Marty. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? He wanted to ask why no one ever protected him. Why no one ever reached out to him. He had 1,000 questions, and none he would allow himself to ask. The answers couldn't matter. He gestured at the door to the ICU. I'll just go see a nurse. I'm not here to break up the family cabal. Inside the doorway, he approached the nurse's station. No one in his family followed him. A poinsettia plant sat on the counter next to a wooden nativity. In front of the counter, ruby-red garland hung in a scalloped design, held up by clear tape. May I help you? The nurse asked as she typed on the keyboard in front of her. I'm Joe Westcott. I was told my father's here. She paused in her typing and glanced at the clock on the wall, then looked at him over the rim of her glasses. The Christmas bell earrings in her ears gave a faint jingling sound as her head moved. Your father's visitors are limited. You can go in, but you only have 10 minutes. She stood and slipped her glasses off her face, putting them in the pocket of her lavender scrubs. Follow me, Mr. Westcott. She led him to a room with glass walls. Next to the door, a computer hung suspended from an articulated mechanical arm. She paused and swiped her badge on the card reader next to the keyboard. Then she quickly typed something. Joe stared at his father through the glass. The once domineering and powerful oldest brother of the Westcott Marine boys lay stretched out looking like a fragile shell in a hospital bed. He had expected wires and tubes, but he simply had a nasal cannula in his nose and a pulse ox monitor attached to his finger. Your father is at the end stage of congestive heart failure. He's signed a DNR. Right now, we keep him comfortable and manage his pain. We don't expect him to make it through the end of the week. She pushed a button and the glass door slid open silently. He should hear you. Why had his hands suddenly gone cold? Why did a nervous flutter start in his heart and plummet like a sickening tide to his stomach? This man couldn't hurt him any more. At least, not physically. As sweat broke out on his upper lip, he stepped into the glass world. The door slid shut behind him. He had 10 minutes, but he used half that time to just stare at the man in the bed, trying to remember anything happy. Any time at all. But he had no memories about this man that weren't centered on fear or pain. Joseph, he said, refusing to call the man father. His eyelids fluttered and eventually opened. When he focused on Joe, his eyes widened. Joey, he whispered. So you recognize me. He slipped his hands in his pockets and stayed well away from the bed. Your wife told me you were on your deathbed. I suppose I had to come see for myself. His father's upper lip snarled.
Yeah, well, now you've seen me, he gasped. Mother Nature hurt me more than you could ever dream of. Going to relish in my pain? Celebrate when I finally die? Spit on my grave?
Something inside of him twisted painfully. He stepped forward, wanting to reach out, but unwilling to bridge any physical gap. I have no intention of celebrating, and whether you're worth my spit is up for debate. The truth is, I'll mourn the fact that you are an evil man, doomed to suffer an eternity for the life you lived on Earth, while I did absolutely nothing to try to change that. One day, we will all have to answer for our sins. My silence is something I believe God will demand an accounting for from me.
Blah, God,
Joseph mocked, making a wheezing sound as he struggled to shift his body upward.
Don't try to talk to me about your imaginary friend.
You rather we talk about Mother Nature some more? Joe felt his eyebrow raise in irony. At least my God is real, and he is so powerful and so loving that even a man as evil as you can still live in eternity and glory, just by accepting his gift. His father chuffed.
Oh, right, gifts. Like from magical elves. It's Christmas time after all. All kinds of gifts on Santa's sleigh. Fairy tales. Don't preach about some deity that doesn't exist. My whole life, I was my own god, boy.
With a sad smile, Joe nodded. And you ruled over your greedy little kingdom with force and wrath. Right this second, you're just hours or even minutes away from learning just how small you are and just how big my God is. I'm sorry I never tried to tell you about him before.
I don't believe in your heaven, boy. After I die, I'm just going to go rot in the dirt like your mother.
Joe sighed. I hope that's the worst thing that happens to you, Joseph. But I actually believe you're in for one hell of a surprise.
Think so? You're the one who's in for a big surprise after I'm gone.
His father's voice sounded almost jolly. Joe had no idea what his father was talking about, and quite frankly, didn't care. He had long since learned not to take the bait. He looked at the clock and felt some relief that his 10 minutes had come and gone. Goodbye, Joseph. As he turned and pushed the button for the door, his father rasped behind him.
Get back here. I want to tell you about your surprise.
He didn't even turn to look back. He could not bring himself to. He walked through the unit, past the nurse's station, and through the double doors that led to the waiting room. While he didn't pause to speak to his family, he did glance in their direction. If one person had called him back, he would have probably stopped, but no one did. Madeline sucked on a piece of ginger candy, fighting back the remnants of air sickness that always struck her when flying in her father's private jet. On Christmas Eve, one simply did not catch a flight out of the Keys. Her brother and his wife Faith had learned that themselves. So she commandeered the jet, sat next to Faith, who flew it, so the company pilot could enjoy the holiday with his family, and prayed for Joe the entire flight. Faith hadn't stayed. She seemed to understand Madeline's need to do this alone. Instead, she had hugged her and promised her that if she needed someone to talk to, she was available any time. After walking through the shockingly cold air to the limo stand, she had her driver take her to the Viscolli Hotel. She had called the hotel from the plane, so they expected her. The manager met her at the door, taking her personally to her penthouse suite. This isn't necessary, she insisted. It's just me. The rest of the family's back home. I understand, Miss Viscolli, he said. But the room is free, and we always give it to your father whenever he's in town. Not wanting to press any further, she acquiesced. Very well. What about the delivery I asked to have waiting for me? 4 outfits, shoes, coats, and accessories are waiting for your appraisal, Miss Viscolli. Your driver is downstairs, waiting to take you wherever you need to go. She nodded. Thank you, and Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Miss Viscolli. We're all very happy you'll be here with us for the holidays. She walked through the suite. She stopped and ran her fingers over the branches of the Christmas tree. Smartly displayed in front of the big glass doors that led to the patio, all the decorations were gold and cream, making it an elegant sight for the few who would actually see it. At the base of the tree, a gold nativity scene sat on a cream-colored base that reflected the white and yellow lights draped over the tree. She had never spent Christmas away from her family before, but she felt thankful for the last week, for the bonding time with those she loved the most. Now she had to focus on Joe and be there for him. After a quick shower, she went through the clothes the hotel had provided from a boutique they partnered with. She chose a gray wool skirt and black sweater. After belting a thin leather belt around her waist, she clipped the black earrings in her ears, then twisted her hair into a braided bun. She touched up her makeup, then transferred her wallet and room key to the new gray and black houndstooth purse. Slipping on her brand new shoes, she hurried back downstairs, pulling her new gray wool coat on as she exited the elevator. The driver stood by the valet, and the town car idled in the loading zone. She pulled the printed copy of the online newspaper article out of her pocket and handed it to the driver. "Can you take me here, please?" The driver's eyebrows knit in recognition of the address. "Yes, Miss Viscolli. I'll get you there just as fast as I safely can." The sniffling widow in the corner, whom he had discovered was named Jessica, set Joe's teeth on edge. He couldn't understand why he'd come here. His uncles and cousins stood together off to the side. None of them had spoken to him except his oldest cousin, Jerry, the only child of his father's younger brother, and the only one absent from the hospital a few days ago. Jerry came out of a back room as Joe entered, stopping him at the doorway and telling him that this room was reserved for family only, that the funeral would begin in 2 hours. Joe had raised an eyebrow and said, "Thanks for the info, cuz." He'd sputtered, looked to his father for confirmation, then left him to make his way to stand by the window and wait alone. He wore his suit. He'd had it custom tailored for his college graduation, the only time he'd ever worn it before. If he had taken the path of his cousins, he would dress similarly every day with drivers taking him to the corporate offices of Westcott Marine, a company that built everything from dinghies to aircraft carriers. Jessica hadn't bothered to stop crying long enough to speak to him, though she did look at him over her handkerchief once with suspicious, narrowed eyes that belied the supposed tears. He was kind of surprised at how young she looked. If she was older than his 26 years, it wasn't by much. When a uniformed maid brought Jessica a little girl with a shock of red hair and a little gray dress, he actually felt his jaw drop. The child couldn't be more than 2 years old. Jessica took her and stood her next to her chair, straightening the gray and white polka dot bow in her hair. Joe stepped forward before he could talk himself out of it. He ignored the mother and knelt next to the little girl. "Hello there. What's your name?" She put her 2 middle fingers in her mouth and stared at him with big green eyes. He looked up at Jessica quizzically. She answered him. "Rosie." He looked back at the little girl and held out his hand. "Hi, Rosie. I'm Joe." He pointed at his hair. "We have the same red hair. I think our daddy gave it to us." She cautiously pulled her fingers out of her mouth and pointed at her hair. "Hair!" Then she giggled and reached for Joe's whiskered chin. "Hair!" He held his hands out and she stepped forward, letting him scoop her up. "That's right, hair." He looked at Rosie's mother as he stood. "How old is she?" The woman sniffled one more time before answering. "She'll be 2 Valentine's Day." "Born on St. Valentine's Day. That's just a few months away." He put his lips to her cheek and inhaled the smell of baby shampoo and little girl. She giggled and pushed at his chin. "Hair!" Clearly his whispers tickled, so he kissed her neck and made her giggle with sheer joy. Whatever part of his heart had ripped apart at the sight of his father in that bed started to mend back together again. Even Jessica's tears stilled while she watched them play. He carried Rosie back to the window with him, expecting her mother to protest, but she never said a word. They looked out the window and talked about the world outside of the big church. She kept running her hands over his face as if marveling at his beard. That was how Madeline found him. She walked into the room reserved for the family and immediately saw Joe standing at the window holding a little red-haired girl. The resemblance between the two momentarily stopped Madeline in her tracks. She intentionally pushed back 1,000 questions and smoothed her skirt. No one challenged her as she came into the room and walked straight over to him. "Hi there," she greeted softly, putting a hand on his arm. Startled, he turned toward her. "Maddie!" His face lit in a smile. With his free hand, he cupped her cheek, his hand warming the cold skin. "What are you doing here?" She rose to her toes and quickly kissed his lips. "Kisses!" Rosie observed. Madeline grinned, then looked around at the somber and serious group. "I couldn't very well send you into the lion's den without backup, now could I?" His fingers flexed against her hairline, and he stared into her eyes. She whispered, "You should have asked me to come. I couldn't pull you away from your family Christmas for this." He ran his hand over her shoulder before touching the little girl's hair. "Apparently, I have a sister. Madeline Viscolli? This is Rosemary Westcott. Rosie. So this is your sister. The obituary said you had a sister, and I wondered why you never mentioned her." Madeline smiled and touched the girl's cheek. The toddler immediately tried to launch herself into her arms. Madeline laughed and took her from Joe, shifting her purse to accommodate the extra weight. "What a doll you are!" "She is. I would have mentioned her if I knew she existed." She looked at him over Rosie's head. His eyes looked sad. "I guess it's good you came then." With a sigh, he said, "I just hate that it interrupted your holiday. I've had a full week with my family. Being here for you is more important than anything else in my life right now." He smiled and cupped her face again. "I keep trying to find the words to thank God for bringing you into my life, but I keep falling short." Rosie lifted a hand, fingers damp from her mouth, and touched the other side of her face. Madeline felt emotion flood her heart and bring tears to her eyes. "Likewise, Joe. You look beautiful, by the way. I know that at a funeral that should be a non-issue, but you really do. You always do." More pleased than she should be, she reached out and ran her finger over his silver and black tie. "You clean up nicely yourself. I keep seeing you in my mind in a t-shirt and deck shoes." He smiled. "I'm incredibly happy to see you. Overjoyed. And I promise you that an hour after this ordeal, this suit will be nothing but a memory." As she laughed, a young woman with frosted blonde hair approached. She wore a tight black dress that fell just above mid-thigh and 4-inch heels. "I'll take her. It's almost time." The little girl launched herself at her mother, who teetered a bit in her heels. "Let's go now, little one. Time to say bye-bye to Daddy." "Bye," Rosie giggled, pointing at Joe. Madeline slipped her hand into his and leaned against him. "How can I pray for you?" He lifted her hand to his lips and brushed a kiss across her knuckles. "Just to give me strength to get through the next few hours." Chapter 9. If the child had been a boy, then my decision would be different. As it is, I'm standing by it. And if the tart I married doesn't like it, she can go back to the rock I pulled her out from under. Madeline sat with Joe in the back of the attorney's office, holding his hand. She couldn't believe the video she'd just witnessed. In the video he'd attached to his last will and testament, Joseph Westcott had berated his young wife for giving birth to a girl. Apparently, he'd had nothing to do with them since. Her tears, from what Madeline could ascertain, had been caused by the knowledge that she suddenly found herself a single parent, penniless and homeless. Joe, on the other hand, had just inherited his father's vast fortune. As majority shareholder of Westcott Marine, he received 52% of the company, while his uncles each owned 24%. His father had structured the shares that way on purpose, so that even if his brothers joined forces, they couldn't execute a coup d'etat. Joe suddenly realized that his uncles had misguidedly thought that his father would split his shares between his wife and daughter, which would give them an opening for a buyout offer or even a hostile takeover while Rosie's shares remained in trust. Instead, his father had insidiously outmaneuvered absolutely everyone. In willing everything to his estranged son, he ensured that his brothers couldn't get what they wanted. His wife wouldn't get what she needed. His daughter was left out in the cold, and Joe was left holding the bag, stuck with everything he never wanted. He sat next to Madeline in stunned silence. She didn't know what to say, or how to say it to him, so she just allowed him some time and peace to digest the information. His furious uncles left the office in a rage, their sons following close on their heels. When he stood, she stood with him, and followed him to Jessica's side. She sat there, looking so broken, with tears running down her face, smearing her makeup. Madeline sat next to her and put a hand on top of hers. "Jessica," he began, then, "May I call you Jessica?" She nodded. "Okay. Everything's going to be okay." Madeline squeezed the woman's hand. "It will be." "How can you say that? The second he died, all my accounts were frozen. I couldn't even get a car to come here. One of those awful men had to arrange a ride for me to come to my own husband's funeral. They only did it because they thought I was going to inherit. Me or Rosie." She gestured toward the door.
Now they left me here. I don't even have a ride home or a token for the bus.
Joe knelt next to the chair and took her hand.
Listen to me, Jessica. I don't want the house or any of the life that comes with it.
He looked over at the attorney.
I'm sure there's some way I can legally rent it to you for $1 a year.
The attorney shook his head. You won't need to charge her anything. She can just stay there if those are your wishes.
I don't want to stay there. I hated that house.
She wiped her eyes and stood, and Joe stood next to her.
Marrying that man was the worst thing I ever did, until I got my Rosie. She and I moved into the pool house when I came home from the hospital after having her. It gave us a place to stay out of his sight, which made life easier for me.
He looked at the attorney again. Could we draw up a trust for her and Rosie? He nodded. Of course. You can specify a monthly stipend if you'd like, and a trust fund that matures for her daughter at a certain age. Madeline chimed in, understanding what Joe wanted to do.
Let's talk about what an adequate figure would be. Consider it child support from her father, if you want.
Jessica's eyes filled with tears again.
I don't know how to thank you.
Joe smiled. I'm just taking care of my sister. Madeline knew he could have added, the way no one took care of me.
I vote we celebrate tonight, Madeline said with a grin. It's Christmas Eve. I have your gift here. You said you packed mine and brought it with you.
She lifted the spoon of mousse to her lips and let the silky smoothness of the rich buttery chocolate concoction fill her mouth with happiness. Eyes closed, she sighed. When she opened her eyes again, she found Joe grinning at her from across the hotel dining room table. That good, huh?
You really should try it.
He wrinkled his nose. I don't like chocolate. Instead, he dipped his spoon into his apple pie. Now, apple pie, since, I'm an American, is just good citizenship. He chewed and swallowed, then pointed his finger at her. Did you know that chocolate was used for currency by both the Maya and the Aztecs? With a laugh, she said,
I actually knew that one.
After a few more bites of mousse, she said,
And you never answered me. Come on. I want to open presents tonight.
Have you no patience?
None.
Contentedly, she set her spoon down and picked up her cup of coffee.
I have absolutely no patience, and I'm about to start pouting.
He snorted. You wouldn't know how to pout.
True, but I'm willing to learn.
She stuck her lip out, but started laughing so hard that she couldn't hold the look. Joe held up his hands in defense.
Okay, you got me. I am surrendering to your feminine wiles.
She signed the check and they walked to the elevator together. Let me stop at my room, he said, and I'll meet you upstairs. The elevator let him out on the 5th floor, and she continued the ride to the penthouse floor. She went into the suite and got his wrapped presents out of the bedroom closet and put them under the tree. While she waited for him, she lit the gas fire logs, turned on the stereo and found some Christmas hymns, and went into the kitchen to get a pot of tea started. A few minutes later, she heard a knock at the door. She swung the door open just as the teapot started to whistle. Joe stood there, still wearing his suit from the day. He looked so handsome, so authoritative, that it made her heart skip a little beat. Hi, she said with a grin, as if it hadn't been 5 minutes since she last saw him.
Come in. I'm making tea.
All Viscolli hotels kept records of what staples to stock in the kitchens for her family. Whenever she stayed in one, she could count on fresh lemons, her favorite tea, and local honey. She added water to the pot, which already contained the tea bags, and carried the tray into the living room. She set it on the table in front of the fireplace. Outside the big window, a light snow had started falling.
Look, she exclaimed, snow!
She rushed to the patio doors and slid them open, stepping outside into the night. Aren't you from Boston? Joe asked, following her outside. She lifted her face and felt the cold flakes as they hit her skin.
We have spent every Christmas of my life in Florida. I've never had a white Christmas before.
His arms snaked around her, and he kissed her lips. Against the cold air, his lips were warm. She stepped closer to him and felt his arms come around her while her head spun as he deepened the kiss. She thought she might never want him to stop. She felt like she could stand like this, in the falling snow, and kiss him forever. Until her stocking-clad feet and lack of a coat made her shiver. He broke the kiss and smiled down at her. Merry Christmas, then, beautiful. I'm glad your first white Christmas is with me. They went back inside, and she grabbed the smallest package from under the tree with glee. This one first. He raised an eyebrow. I only have one for you.
With a smile, she said, "Perfect. We'll take turns. You go first, then me, then you." Sighing, he carefully untaped the paper and revealed a leather-bound journal. Imprinted on the front was a sailboat on the stormy seas. Stamped under the boat was the verse, "He calms the storm so that its waves are still." Psalm 107, verse 29. Joe ran a finger over the indention in the leather. "This is beautiful. I'm so happy you like it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a long, thin box with a red ribbon tied around it. Excited, she slipped the ribbon off and opened the box. Nestled in velvet lay a thin gold chain necklace with a star sapphire suspended in a spiral of gold and diamonds. The deep blue of the stone created the perfect backdrop for the bright white starburst exploding from the center. "Oh, Joe," she whispered, feeling her hands tremble slightly as she removed it from its nest and held it up to inspect it. "It is so beautiful." "Pale in comparison to you," he said in a husky voice. She felt her cheeks heat. She lifted her gift from the box and fastened the chain around her neck, surprised her fingers could work the delicate clasp. He looked at the stone that fell just below her collarbone and back at her. "It looks as perfect as I imagined it would," he said. "Thank you," she whispered, fingering the setting of the stone. She got up and grabbed his other present. "Now you again." He opened the bag and withdrew the brass sailboat figure. He read the Bible verse etched in the sail out loud. "In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." Proverbs 3:6. He had such a harsh look on his face that she reached over and touched his knee. "I know that's 2 sailboat presents. I promised for Valentine's Day no boats." When he looked at her, she gasped at the intensity of the look in his eyes. "Joe?" He cleared his throat and looked at the sail again. When he looked up, the look was gone. "This is incredible, and exactly the word I needed right now. Thank you." An hour later, the wrappings cleared away. Madeline sat nestled in the crook of Joe's arm, grasping the star sapphire setting and running it up and down the length of the chain. "Is it hard to be in Providence?" she asked. "I never really lived here after age 12. Never really saw much of the city. We were rather isolated out on the estate." He propped his feet up on the coffee table and closed his eyes. He'd shed his jacket and shoes and loosened his tie earlier. "What are you going to do?" He opened one eye, clearly understanding what she asked. "I have no idea. Sell my shares to my uncles, maybe. Hold something back for my sister." She paused her playing with her necklace, her fingers stilled, almost holding her breath while she waited for his answer. "I don't want to run the company." This attitude didn't make any sense to her. From the time she could sit up, she'd been in her father's office. She couldn't think of a time she hadn't desperately wanted to run Viscolli Enterprises. When her brother announced to the family that he truly wasn't interested, Madeline couldn't have been happier. "What would you want to do if your father was removed from the equation?" "He's as removed as he can be." Joe pulled his feet down and sat up, causing her to have to straighten. They no longer touched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you worked with an attorney today to handle the welfare and future of your little sister, negotiating with millions of dollars that were at your disposal." He started to speak, but she held up her hand. "And you did it with the grace and wisdom of a man born to do it. You have a gift for business and numbers, Joe. I think you need to—" He cut her off. "I really appreciate you coming today." Pushing himself to his feet, he grabbed his jacket and slipped his arms into the sleeves. "Having you there by my side made it so much easier to handle." She sighed and rubbed her eyes. "I'm so glad. It took great effort and expense to get to you. Thankfully, I had those resources and was able to accomplish it." Madeline stood, too, feeling irritated but unable to put her finger on why. Joe narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" She lifted her chin. "That means that I'm Madeline Viscolli, daughter of Antonio Viscolli. I've been training to take over Viscolli Enterprises since I was a little girl, and I have every intention of doing so." He clenched his jaw as he slipped his feet into the leather loafers he'd worn that day. "You know, I tried to have this conversation with you a month ago, and you assured me that it didn't matter because you still have months of school left." Subconsciously, she'd crossed her arms over her chest, as if to shield herself from what she was about to say. "That was before I knew I was in love with you. Now, after today, I'm in love with your baby sister, too. I can't get any closer to you, grow any deeper in a relationship with you, knowing that it's going to have to end in 6 months. Because my future is going to have to happen, at least for the immediate time being, in Boston." They stood, staring at each other for 5 seconds, then 10. Finally, without another word, Joe nodded, pivoted on his heel and turned, grabbing the gift bag that contained both of his presents before leaving the hotel room. She stared at the door for 60 seconds, then 90. Suddenly, she felt her breath hitch as the pain in her chest brought her to her knees. She didn't cry or wail. She just wrapped her arms around her middle and leaned forward until her forehead touched the ground. Then she started praying out loud. Joe couldn't get a flight out of Providence until the next day. He forced himself to spend the night in the hotel, though he did not sleep well. He sat and stared at the sailboat with the brass sail and the proverb that cut straight through his soul and sliced his heart in half. He caught a 6 o'clock flight to Charlotte, North Carolina on Christmas morning. From there, he only had to wait an hour to get on a flight to Mobile. As soon as the plane landed, he turned his phone on and fielded texts from Max, Larry, and various crew students who had learned about the death of his father. He had nothing from a woman with eyes the color of the calmest deep blue seas. Instead of calling someone and forcing himself to interact with a friend, he took a cab from the airport to the marina. Once aboard Star Sapphire, he carefully unpacked, returned his suitcase to the storage compartment under his bed, and sat on the couch. Everywhere he looked, he saw Madeline in his mind's eye, filling in the empty places. In just a month, she had completely infiltrated his perfectly ordered, perfectly structured life. Desperate to escape, he went to the one room she had never entered and lay on his bed. At his feet sat the Christmas bag. He sat up and pulled the ship out, fingering the indentation of the words. "In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." Proverbs 3:6. Feeling his breath hitch, he finally said out loud, "Where are you directing me, God? Where is this feeling of discontent suddenly coming from?" He left the cabin and went up the stairs and back out onto the deck. He hopped over the railing onto the dock and unchained his bike and grill, carrying each of them onto the deck and securing them with tie-downs. He started the engine and cast off from the dock, then carefully maneuvered himself out of slip number 67, out of the marina no-wake zone, and then out into Mobile Bay. He always docked with a full tank of gas and restocked supplies. So once he reached the open water, he killed the engine, raised the sails, and let the wind take hold of the vessel. At the wheel, he punched in the coordinates. Chapter 10. Madeline lay curled on the couch in the main living room of her parents' home in Florida, staring at the Christmas tree. This tree stood 12 feet tall and was decorated with handmade ornaments from children throughout the family. Her O'Farrell grandparents had dozens of grandchildren from their years fostering and adopting, and between them, her cousins, and TJ and herself, the tree had grown as the number of ornaments grew. She could think of nothing more joyful than the annual unpacking and hanging of the ornaments. Now she wondered if she could ever feel joy again. She'd arrived back in the Keys on Christmas Day, surprising her family by showing up in the middle of Christmas dinner. When she walked into the dining room, her mother had taken one look at her stricken face and hugged her tight. No one else asked any questions. She soaked in her family's love. She played with her younger cousins. She loved on Rebecca, so thankful to have another Christmas with her. She cooked with her Aunt Maxine, did dishes with her Schonmacher Carolyn, and let her grandfather Craig beat her at checkers 12 times. The chaos of Christmas gradually diminished as family members left. First went Barry, Maxine, and Cora off to see Chase play the bowl game. Then Grandpa Craig left to go work with his prison ministry. Her grandparents, Peter and Caroline, left at the same time to save the pilot from having to fly them on a special trip. On New Year's Eve, her Uncle Derek and Aunt Sarah took their 3 children home. Eventually, the only people who remained in the large home were her immediate family. 7 days ago, Joe Westcott had walked out of her hotel suite without another word, and that was the last she'd heard from him. She'd flown home to Mobile on a chartered flight Christmas Eve night, and Christmas afternoon had gone to the marina to talk to him after calling the hotel in Providence and confirming he had checked out. When she found slip number 67 empty, devoid of a 50-foot sailboat christened Star Sapphire, devoid even of the grill that stayed chained to the dock, she thought her heart had actually stopped beating. Numb, She tried to call him, but had received his voicemail without even a single ring. Not knowing what to say, she'd cleared her throat and stated, "I still owe you a grouper sandwich. They're open for lunch on New Year's Eve. Let's start a tradition." Then she'd purchased a first-class ticket and flew to the Keys. She didn't care about the cost, and she didn't care about how sick to her stomach she felt the entire flight. Now her stomach rolled, not from air sickness, but rather at the thought of going to that fish restaurant and having him simply not show up. Maybe he hadn't even gotten her message. Maybe he was captaining that big white boat to Sydney in order to escape whatever this horrible thing was. She was sorry she'd ever left the message. Why, oh why, was there no way to take something like that back? Was there no way to spin the earth backward on its axis and force time to go backward and undo it? Sniffling, she headed upstairs to her room. It felt bare and empty after the departure of her little cousins. Air mattresses had lined the floor for days and days, and now the big expanse of empty floor looked too depressing to her. She changed into a bright red summer dress and pinned a white angel clutching a star to one of the wide shoulder straps. As always, she wore her star sapphire necklace. Examining her face, she determined she could do nothing about the puffy eyes and dark circles except wear sunglasses. After running a brush through her hair and slipping on a pair of red sandals, she headed back downstairs. In the main hall, her sister-in-law Faith stood on a ladder taking down a bough of holly. "Everything okay, love?" Faith asked, her voice very prim and properly British. "You look a bit wan." She forced a bright smile onto her face. "I have a lunch date. I'll see you guys later." She went through the house and into the garage. Normally, her father kept a classic sapphire blue four-door sedan parked in there. He had purchased the car for her mother a few months before they got married and had driven it to their new house in the Keys on their second wedding anniversary. For over 25 years, the car served as ready transportation for the family while here. Madeline found herself at loose ends when she walked into an empty garage. Outside, she walked around the house and down a path to the old groundkeeper's cottage. After tapping on the door with her bare knuckles, she stepped back and waited. Eventually, her brother opened the door, a look of dazed concentration on his face. Clearly, he was working on his Ph.D. thesis. "Sorry to bother you, Tej. May I borrow your truck?" "It's Nelson's truck, but sure. Where's the car?" His face cleared as he stared at her. "You okay?" As tears sprang to her eyes, she nodded. "I don't know where the car is. I just have to go see about something." Before handing her the keys, TJ stepped out of his little workroom and pulled her into his arms. Out of nowhere, the fountain of tears started again, and she had soaked the front of his shirt before she could stop them. "Someone who makes you cry this hard isn't worth it, baby sis," he observed. "You don't know him." She rubbed at her eyes and held out her hand, palm up. "Can I please borrow the truck?" "Of course." He pulled the keys out of his pocket and set them in her palm, closing her fingers around them. "I'll turn my phone ringer on. If you need me for anything, please call me." She pressed her lips together and nodded, then walked to the truck. As the engine started, the air conditioner blew cold air onto her face, helping her cool off and hopefully helping dry the tears. About 30 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of the sandwich shop. As suspected, the line snaked out the door. Sunglasses on, she squared her shoulders and stepped into the line. Even if he didn't show up, at least she'd get a sandwich to help her forget her sorrows. She felt his hand on her arm before she heard his voice. "Hello, Maddie." With a gasp, she turned around and saw him. He'd gotten tanner by 2 shades at least, and the blonde in his hair had almost overtaken his red. He wore a faded red t-shirt and khaki shorts with canvas shoes. "Joe?" she whispered about a millisecond before she threw herself into his arms. His arms came around her and squeezed her tightly to him. "Got your message." She stepped back from him and slipped her sunglasses onto the top of her head. With a frown, he cupped her cheek. "You've been crying." "Only for about a week." He opened his mouth and shut it again, then gestured toward the tables in the interior of the restaurant. "I hope you don't mind. I already got us sandwiches." Needing a moment to regroup, she followed him to their table and sat down, picking up the ice water in front of her plate and taking a long drink. Finally, she said, "I went to your place Christmas Day. When you were gone, I didn't know what to do. I left that message standing there by your empty slip." He cleared his throat. I had to leave. I had to get out on the water and think. Pray." He pointed toward the water. "I knew I was coming here. I prayed you'd be here." With a raised eyebrow, she said, Giving me a message would have ensured that. Text, email, phone call, singing telegram. True. He rubbed the back of his neck. Listen, Maddie, I've had quite some time to think and pray. That boat you gave me, the verse couldn't have been a word delivered more on time. She smiled a very small smile. God works that way. He does. He seems to be redirecting my path just now. With a little flutter of excitement in her chest, she widened her eyes. Oh? While I sailed here, I spent the week immersed in God's Word. Where He kept taking me back was the story of Joseph of Nazareth. What stood out to me, reading everything I could about Joseph, is that he didn't ask for anything God gave him. He was probably like most men, just wanting to do well in his field, marry, have children. He never went to God and said, Hey God, I'd really like to be the stepfather of your only begotten son. Despite herself, she smiled. His style of teaching had always engaged her. He continued, Matthew says Joseph woke from his dream where an angel assured him that Mary's child was the Son of God. And the exact words are, Then Joseph did as the angel of the Lord commanded. Madeline wanted to interject and reassure, but she didn't want to interrupt. Point is, he didn't argue that it wasn't what he wanted. Never said it was something he never asked for. Didn't try to wiggle out of it, even once. He took Mary as his wife. When Christ was a very young child, he listened without question to another angel and fled with his family to Egypt. He offered a sacrifice for a child who wasn't his son and raised him as God commanded. Eyes burning with intensity, he reached forward and took her hand. I can take a hint from God. Joseph didn't even flinch when God chose him and derailed his entire life. But God had a plan for Joseph, and God's plans were good. I have always believed God had a plan for my life. If I'm open to listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit, then I have to admit that He's leading me toward a path I wouldn't have chosen for myself. I have to accept it because my choice must be to trust God and believe that the ultimate end is part of His plan for my life, and that His plan for me is good. Her mind swirling with questions, all she could manage to ask was, What does that mean, really? He smiled and answered, You know something? I don't completely know what the final outcome will be. It depends on some things. But I know this. You will be in Boston and Rosie will be in Providence. What I know for sure is that I need to be up there near you, and I need to be close to my sister. She felt a panic trying to work itself through the radiant joy. Are you sure? You're so content with Mobile. He shook his head. That's the thing. I wasn't content. I was surviving, and working at the university kept me centered and focused on Christ. I needed to heal, and it took years to do it. He looked at her hand clutched between both of his. I had prepared myself to be alone. Now I can't imagine doing anything in life without you. Honestly, I have trouble remembering anything significant about my life before the day we met. She licked her lips and put her free hand on top of their joined ones. Can you cope with the life that will be my destiny? I thought about that, he said, turning his hands so that he held each one of hers. I think I could tolerate the kind of woman who flies commercial when she could just buy the airline. With a grin, she said, Don't forget, you could buy the airline now, too. With a heavy sigh, he said, Don't remind me. His face sobered and he looked her in the eye. I've known for some time now that I was in love with you. Thanksgiving night, really. But I didn't realize until last week how much of you is now a part of me. I need you by my side. Heart pounding furiously, she felt tears spring to her eyes again. I don't ever want to leave your side again. I love you, Joseph Westcott. Maddie, I don't know when I realized I loved you. Once I realized it, it felt like I had loved you all my life. I guess that means I loved you from the first moment you stumbled into the auditorium, all jet-lagged from England over a year ago. But I know this. I love you like crazy. I really do. They clasped hands, their sandwiches growing cold between them, and stared into each other's eyes. So intense was their gaze that Madeline didn't realize exactly when her parents walked up behind them. So, the unmistakable voice of her father began, This is young Mr. Westcott, I presume. Papa? Mama?
Madeline gasped. We were running errands in town and saw Nelson's truck. We assumed your brother had finally come up for air. I'm pleased to see I was mistaken. Joe shot to his feet. Madeline stood slowly and said,
Joe, these are my parents, Robin and Tony Viscolli.
Sir, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Joe offered his hand. Tony grinned and accepted the younger man's grip. And you as well.
Ma'am?
Joe offered.
Oh, heavens, no. My name is Robin, not ma'am.
She shook his hand.
Good luck with that, Mama,
Madeline asserted.
Took over a year for him to call me Maddie.
Joe grinned. Military school. My apologies. Tony grinned, a twinkle in his eye. Sir is just fine with me. He gestured at their table. Why don't we all sit and get to know each other better?
Actually, sir, could I have a word?
Tony's eyebrows shot up. After you. Robin took a seat next to her daughter, and the men stepped outside.
So that's Pastor Joe Westcott,
Robin observed.
That is him, Mama. Indeed it is.
Robin said,
He's very tall.
Madeline grinned.
I know. I know you don't know me very well, sir, seeing as how we just met, but the fact is, I love your daughter,
Joe began. Tony looked as if he felt a tug inside his chest, a fishhook, maybe, or a hot coal. As do I, young man. As do I. And I know she loves you. My daughter and I have no secrets. Is there something you wanted to ask me?
Yes, sir.
Joe heard his words as if someone else spoke them, someone who could speak with eloquence and graceful authority.
I would ask for your blessing to bring Madeline a proposal of marriage so that she and I can be joined forever in holy matrimony.
I see, Tony said, and didn't even look surprised. Madeline tells me you had a bad childhood. Though the statement surprised Joe, his poise remained intact. She says the same about you and her mother, and she told me how her grandfather served time for murder. Tony nodded. She also says you very recently inherited control of Westcott Marine, though you claim you hate and reject wealth.
That's almost right, sir.
Almost?
I inherited control of Westcott Marine, and I hate every kind of evil the love of money can spawn.
So you don't love money yourself?
I'd like to say I don't.
The two men came to a stop beneath the shade of a palm tree that still had Christmas lights wrapped around its trunk. Joe took a thoughtful breath and said,
The truth is, I don't really know. The only thing I know for sure is that I want to go to heaven after I leave here. I want to spend eternity at the foot of my Heavenly Father's throne. I think that will keep my eyes and heart where they need to stay. Tony crossed his arms.
Christ said it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God.
Notice, he didn't say it was impossible. He said it was incredibly difficult and only nearly impossible.
Joe grinned.
I believe you'll make it, sir.
Tony smiled.
I most earnestly pray you're right. But let's talk about you for now. You and my daughter. What are your plans?
When I left Providence, I didn't have a plan. He put his hands in his pockets.
I like working with crew at the ground level, down in the trenches. I love it, really. But the truth is, one day I'll age out. Pretty soon now. The students will think I'm too old and won't open up to me anymore. As much as I never wanted to, my plan is to move back to Providence and take over Westcott Marine. I won't leave ministry altogether. For the rest of my life, I'll just continue to support ministries in every way I can, and maybe I'll go on mission trips or take over a pulpit on special occasions.
Why?
Because I know God made me especially for Madeline Viscolli, and He made her just for me. Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, sir. He made us to be as one. I know it. And the best way she and I can be as one is if I take over Westcott Marine.
You know it, do you?
Unquestionably, sir.
Tony nodded. He uncrossed his arms and laid a firm hand on Joe's shoulder. You know, before I married Madeline's mother, we had some trouble, she and I. It came down to me doing some soul searching. What I realized is that I had to be willing to give up absolutely everything, even though I selfishly didn't want to, and just be Robin's husband the way God wanted. And eventually I was willing to give it all up, and I told her so. I take it you've been doing some soul searching this past week?
Joe nodded. What I realized, sir, is that I have to be willing to take on Westcott Marine even though I selfishly didn't want to. I have to take it on and just be Madeline's husband, the way God intended.
Seems like a lot to take on just for love.
Well, I have a good role model. Christ took on the sin of the entire world for his bride, even though he really didn't want to. He sighed and tried to put into words what he felt. In Genesis, when Joseph confronted his brothers, he told them that what they intended for evil, God intended for good. He intended it for good. That tells me that throughout all of it, God's hand was there. Who knows how long God's hand has been directing the circumstances of my life. But what my father intended for evil, God revealed to me that I can take and turn it into something good. Tony squeezed the man's shoulder, an affirming grip that signaled his approval. Have you told Maddie about your plans? Not yet. I wanted to propose first. So I wanted to get your blessing first. Tony sighed and pulled his hand back. With his arms crossed over his chest again, he quietly demanded, Tell me why I should give you my blessing to marry my only daughter. Joe blinked. With all due respect, I think I just did, sir. This here should be good, Madeline said, toeing the sand. We'll be able to see the New Year's fireworks perfectly from here. Yes, ma'am. Joe flicked his wrists, and the red and green quilt with the snowflake blocks billowed out in front of them. He bent down and straightened the corner by her foot. While down there, he grabbed her hand. She knew. She looked down at him, kneeling on one knee, and knew what came next. Before he could speak, she said, Did you know that this is the spot where my father proposed to my mother? I didn't, but I bet God knew. Still holding onto her hand, he reached into his pocket. Madeline, I have been broken and alone my entire life. The last few weeks have taught me something. I've learned that God designed someone especially for me. With you by my side, I don't have to be alone, and I don't have to be broken. I can be whole. He opened the box in his hand and revealed a beautiful princess-cut diamond ring with tiny star sapphires on either side of the gemstone. Madeline Viscolli, will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? As she looked down at him, fireworks shot from the barge just off the beach and lit up the entire night sky. It was as if he had set the stage for the most perfect proposal ever. She thought of the time since Thanksgiving and how right and perfect it felt when they were together. Yes, she answered with a smile. I will absolutely be your wife. Instead of waiting for him to stand, she knelt with him. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. With the fireworks erupting all around them and the clock striking midnight, they kissed with a promise of forever. 1 year later. Snow fell in blinding sheets, blanketing the city. Madeline watched it from the window of the apartment, the lights from the Christmas tree reflecting back at her from the window, making a beautiful, festive, picturesque scene. Anxious, she turned toward the door when she heard the lock. I was so worried, she exclaimed, rushing forward. Maddie! A well-bundled Rosie squealed from Joe's arms. Maddie! How's my little sister-in-law? Joe brushed the snow out of his hair and struggled with the wiggly little girl to get her out of her coat and hat. I thought for a minute I was going to have to stay there, he confessed. I probably shouldn't have tried to drive, but it didn't get too bad until I was halfway home. He held up a bag. These are from Jessica. She sends holiday greetings and said to have fun this week. He hung their coats in the closet while Rosie launched herself at Madeline. Are you ready for the beach, little one? She laughed. Yes, Rosie giggled. And fishing! Joe said fishing! Did he really? Kneeling, she met Rosie at eye level and grinned. Well then, I bet we'll be fishing. And don't forget the pool. She straightened and looked at Joe. I don't think we're flying out tonight. Not a single chance, he agreed. You going to be okay with missing Christmas in the Keys? I know you never have. While Rosie rushed to the tree to look at the gaily wrapped presents beneath it, Madeline went up to her husband and slipped her arms around his neck. This is our year to be making new traditions, isn't it? She gestured at the window. And it's my second white Christmas Eve. Yes, but we'll have Christmas Eve here, and maybe by tomorrow the airport will reopen. She leaned her head back and looked at him. In the meantime, we have an anxious 3-year-old who is desperate to know what's in the gigantic box over there. With a smile, he brushed her hair back from her face. As long as we're eating grouper sandwiches in a week and watching the fireworks from the beach, I'm okay with that. He kissed her, long and slow. Merry Christmas, Madeline Westcott. The end. You have been listening to Christmas Star Sapphire, a novella, Part 6 of the Jewel series by Hallee Bridgeman. Original copyright 2015. All rights reserved. No part of this work may be reproduced or transmitted in any form or by any means without express written permission.
The only exception is brief excerpts for critical articles or reviews. This book is published in all formats by Olivia Kimbrell Press. Olivia Kimbrell Press is a publisher offering true-to-life, meaningful fiction and nonfiction from a Christian worldview, intended to uplift the heart and engage the mind. The Olivia Kimbrell Press colophon and logo are trademarks of Olivia Kimbrell Press. Original cover art and graphics by Amanda Gale Smith. This audiobook was read by Gene Rowley and recorded and edited by Gene Rowley Voiceover. Some scripture quotations courtesy of the King James Version of the Holy Bible. Some scripture quotations courtesy of the New King James Version of the Holy Bible. Copyright owned by Thomas Nelson Incorporated. Used by permission. All rights reserved. This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, organizations, places, locales, or to persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental and beyond the intent of either the author or publisher. Please ask your library or favorite bookstore about other fine titles by Hallee Bridgeman, including more books in the Jewel series. On behalf of everyone involved with this project, we hope you have deeply enjoyed this audiobook presentation and pray God's blessing on you today and always.